Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Sports Lab. Today, we're putting on our lab coats to break down one of the most mesmerizing, almost mythical figures in the history of international hockey. Think about the Mount Rushmore of Russian hockey players. Your mind probably goes straight to the modern era, right? You're picturing the sheer, unadulterated force of Alex Ovechkin. You see that hulking frame, the tinted visor, the yellow laces, and that cannon of a one-timer from his office on the left side half wall. He's a force of nature, an avalanche on skates who has scored more goals than almost anyone who has ever played the game. But what if I told you that before the Great Eight, before the era of the Russian goal-scoring machine, there was a different kind of terror? A player who didn't overpower you, but outthought you, who didn't run you over, but vanished like a phantom just as you went to make the hit. Before Ovechkin, there was the Soviet hockey magician who terrified NHL defensemen, Valeri Kharlamov. Before we get into the analysis, if you're a fan of the in-depth side of sports, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us continue bringing these stories to you. And leave a comment below with a game or play you think we should break down next. We read every single one. Alright, let's get into the game film. To truly appreciate the genius of Valeri Kharlamov, you first have to recalibrate your entire understanding of what made a hockey player dominant in that era. If Alex Ovechkin is a sledgehammer, Kharlamov was a surgeon's scalpel. Ovechkin's game is about overwhelming force. It's about kinetic energy. He builds up a head of steam through the neutral zone, and he is a freight train daring you to stand on the tracks. He will either go around you or through you, and when he unleashes his shot, it's with an explosive violence that goalkeepers can only hope to get a piece of. It's beautiful in its brutality. You watch Ovechkin, and you see the physical manifestation of power. Kharlamov was the opposite. His game wasn't about power, it was about the absence of it. It was about finesse, deception, and a mastery of physics that seemed to defy logic. When you watch the old, grainy footage, you'll notice he rarely barrels into an opponent. Instead, he uses their momentum, their aggression, against them. A defenseman would line him up for a thunderous body check, planting his feet to deliver the blow. And in that split second, Kharlamov would make a minute, almost imperceptible shift. In his balance, a slight dip of the shoulder, or a change in edge, and suddenly he'd be gone. The defender would be left clutching at air, thrown off balance and spinning in a circle, while Kharlamov was already accelerating towards the net. He didn't absorb contact. He avoided it with an elegance that was almost insulting to the guys trying to hit him. His dominance wasn't loud. It was a quiet, deadly efficiency that left opponents utterly bewildered. The hockey world, particularly North America, had its formal introduction to this silent assassin on September 2nd, 1972. This is the date of Game 1 of the legendary Summit Series. You have to understand the context. For Canada, this series was supposed to be a formality, a victory lap to prove their undisputed global supremacy in the sport they invented. The players on Team Canada were the best of the NHL. Phil Esposito, Ken Dryden, Frank Mahovlich, Bobby Clarke. They were hockey royalty. They expected to face a robotic, disciplined, but ultimately less skilled Soviet team. They predicted an 8-game sweep. What they got, instead, was a hockey lesson, and Valeri Kharlamov was the professor. In that first game at the Montreal Forum, a building that was a cathedral to Canadian hockey, Kharlamov put on a clinic. He scored the goals in a 7-3 Soviet victory that sent a shockwave through the sport. But it wasn't just that he scored, it was how he scored. For his first goal, you can watch him pick up the puck in the neutral zone. He builds speed with these incredibly powerful, deep strides, his body almost parallel to the ice. NHL defensemen Don Ray and Rod Silent are back to defend. These are not scrubs. These are veteran, respected blueliners. Kharlamov drives wide, forcing Ray to commit, just as Ray angles to cut him off. Kharlamov executes a lightning-fast cut back towards the middle of the ice. It's so quick, so fluid, that Ray is left completely flat-footed. Silent is now caught in no man's land, and before Ken Dryden, one of the greatest goalies of all time, can even react, Kharlamov has deposited the puck in the back of the net. The forum fell silent. No one had ever seen speed and agility like that. This brings us to a crucial counter-argument to a common modern belief. Today, when you think of the defining characteristic of Russian hockey, you might think of that Ovechkin one-timer, of players like Evgeny Malkin using their size and skill, or Nikita Kucherov with his deceptive playmaking. But the original Soviet revolution in hockey wasn't built on the individual power forward. It was built on the collective, on creativity, and on a level of skating and puck control that North America had never conceived of. The modern perception is that Russian hockey is defined by the goal scorer, the sniper, but the truth is, the system that produced Kharlamov was designed to create artists. It was about constant motion, interchangeability of positions, and short, quick passes that dismantled defenses piece by piece. Ovechkin is, in many ways, an incredible talent who adapted his game to a more North American style. He is the ultimate finisher. Kharlamov, on the other hand, was the purest product of the Soviet system and on ice illusionist whose magic laid the foundation for every great Russian player who followed. He was the one who first opened the door and showed the world that there was another way to play the game. So, to really get to the core of what made Valeri Kharlamov so unique, you have to look at the laboratory where he was created. You can't separate the artist from the environment that nurtured his genius. That laboratory was the CSKA Moscow Hockey Club, the Central Red Army team, and its headmaster was a man named Anatoly Tarasov. If you want to understand Kharlamov, you first have to understand Tarasov, the fiery, brilliant, and often tyrannical figure known as the father of Soviet hockey. Tarasov wasn't just a coach. He was a philosopher, a strategist, and a patriot who saw the hockey rink as an ideological battleground. He believed that the Soviet style of hockey, creative, collective, and relentless, could prove the superiority of their way of life, and he was willing to push his players to inhuman limits to prove his point. Tarasov's training philosophy was completely alien to anything happening in North America at the time. While an NHL practice might consist of some warm-up skating, line rushes, and a scrimmage, a Tarasov practice was a grueling, multi-hour session that blended sports science with artistic expression and military discipline. He wasn't just training hockey players. He was building super athletes with the minds of chess grandmasters. He famously drew inspiration from the Bolshoi Ballet, studying how dancers controlled their bodies with grace and power, and he incorporated those principles into his skating drills. He wanted his players to be not just fast, but fluid, not just strong, but balanced. For Tarasov, the game wasn't about dumping the puck in and chasing it. It was about possession, control, and creating geometric passing plays that were as beautiful as they were effective. The methods he used to achieve this were the stuff of legend. You can almost feel your own legs burning as you picture what these players went through. Imagine being a young Kharlamov. Your day might involve carrying a teammate on your back while doing frog jumps up the steep concrete stairs of a stadium, an exercise designed to build explosive, almost unbelievable leg strength. This is the source of that explosive first step that left NHL defenders grasping at air. On the ice, you might spend an hour just skating, no pucks, no sticks, working on nothing but your edges, your balance, your crossovers, until the movements were as unconscious and natural as breathing. Tarasov would have his players do drills where they had to leap over obstacles placed on the ice, forcing them to develop an incredible sense of agility and body control. He even had them practice with weighted pucks or medicine balls on dry land to build the core and arm strength necessary to make crisp, hard passes for a full 60 minutes. One of his most famous drills perfectly encapsulates his philosophy. He would sometimes take the pucks away entirely and make his team play the game without one, forcing them to visualize the play, to anticipate where their teammates would be, and to move in perfect synchronization. He was training their minds just as hard as their bodies. The goal was to develop an instinctual, telepathic chemistry. By the time the puck was reintroduced, the passing was second nature. This is why when you watch the great Soviet teams, it often looks like they know where the puck is going before the pass is even made. It's because, in a way, they had already played the game 1,000 times in their heads during these grueling, puck-less sessions. This relentless training is what gave Kharlamov his phenomenal endurance. He could skate at top speed, shift after shift, and his skill level would never drop. In the third period, when North American players raised on a less demanding regimen were starting to tire, Kharlamov and his teammates were often just hitting their stride. Now, the common Western perception at the time, and a criticism you'll still hear today, is that this system created robots. Commentators would describe the Soviets as emotionless, programmed machines, executing a pre-planned attack devoid of individual flair. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of Tarasov's goal. He wasn't trying to stifle creativity. He was trying to unlock it. Think of it like a concert pianist. That pianist practices scales for 8 hours a day. a repetitive, robotic task, but they don't do it to become a machine. They do it so that their mastery of the instrument becomes so absolute, so ingrained in their muscle memory, that their fingers can move without conscious thought. This frees up their mind to focus entirely on the music, on the emotion, on the art. That's precisely what Tarasov was doing with hockey. The endless, punishing drills were the scales. He drilled the fundamentals of skating, passing, and conditioning into his players so relentlessly that they no longer had to think about them. During a game, this conditioning freed their brilliant hockey minds to see the ice, to anticipate, to create. He wasn't building robots. He was building a foundation of physical and technical superiority upon which artistic genius could flourish. And Valeri Kharlamov was his masterpiece. Kharlamov, who was initially considered too small and slight to succeed at the highest level, was the ultimate proof that Tarasov's system worked. It took his raw, natural talent and surrounded it with a framework of unparalleled physical, conditioning, and tactical understanding. The system didn't crush his individuality. It weaponized it. It gave the magician the physical tools to perform his illusions on the world's biggest stages for a full 60 minutes against any opponent. It was in this crucible of fire and ice that the legend was truly forged. Now that you understand the system that built the man, you have to understand the unit that unleashed him. In the Soviet hockey philosophy, the individual, no matter how brilliant, was always in service to the collective. The primary building block of this collective was the three-man forward unit known as a troika. This wasn't just a line in the North American sense where you might have a sniper, a playmaker, and a grinder. A Soviet troika was conceived as a single, cohesive entity with three interchangeable parts, a tactical unit designed for relentless puck possession and intricate, triangular passing plays. And for over a decade, the most feared troika on the planet was centered by Vladimir Petrov, had Boris Mikhailov on the right wing and Valeri Kharlamov on the left. To watch this line operate at its peak was to see hockey as a form of kinetic art. Their success was rooted in a perfect, almost symbiotic complementarity of skills. Each player was a star in his own right, but together, they became something more. A unit that was far greater than the sum of its already formidable parts. You had three distinct personalities and skill sets that meshed flawlessly. On the right wing was the captain, Boris Mikhailov. He was the engine and the conscience of the line. Mikhailov wasn't the fastest skater or the most gifted stick handler, but he may have been the most tenacious hockey player on earth. He was a relentless competitor, absolutely fearless, with a bulldog-like determination to win every single puck battle. You'll see him on the film, number 13, crashing into the corners against bigger defensemen, absorbing punishment, and somehow always emerging with a puck. He was the master of the dirty areas, in the corners, along the boards, and in front of the net, where he scored a huge number of his goals through sheer will and perfect positioning. He was the emotional leader, the one who set the tone with his work ethic. In the middle, you had the architect, Vladimir Petrov. Petrov was the anchor, a big, powerful, and exceptionally intelligent center, standing over 6 feet tall and built like a bull. He was the physical presence that gave the line its stability. When you watch him play, you'll notice how he used his size to protect the puck, holding off defenders with one arm while surveying the ice with his head up. He was a brilliant distributor of the puck, the fulcrum around which the line's offense pivoted. He could slow the game down, control possession along the half-boards, and then, with a subtle turn or a deceptive pass, he would open up a seam for one of his wingers. He was the line's brain, the crucial link between Mikhailov's hard work and Kharlamov's finishing touch. And then, on the left side, you had the artist, number 17, Valeri Kharlamov. He was the tip of the spear. Once Mikhailov had won the puck and Petrov had established control, it was Kharlamov's job to be the creative genius, the dagger that finished the play. His line mates did the foundational work that created time and space, and Kharlamov exploited that space with his breathtaking speed and skill. Let's walk through a typical goal from this troika. You can pull up dozens of examples on film. It often starts with a puck dumped into the opponent's zone. You'll see Mikhailov get on his horse. For checking relentlessly, he pressures the defenseman, forces a turnover, or engages in a grueling battle along the boards. He digs the puck free and chips it back to Petrov, who has circled in for support. Now Petrov takes over. He uses his big frame to shield the puck from a backchecker. Buying a precious second or two, in that moment, he isn't panicking. He's processing. He's reading the entire defensive coverage. Meanwhile, where's Kharlamov? He hasn't been standing still. He's been moving without the puck, ghosting into an open area, timing his acceleration perfectly. Petrov, without even looking, knows exactly where Kharlamov is going to be. He feathers a perfect pass into open ice, and Kharlamov receives it already at full throttle. Now the magic happens. He attacks the remaining defenseman, who is completely isolated, and with a head fake and a burst of speed, he's gone. The goalie is left helpless, puck in the net. It looked like a moment of individual brilliance from Kharlamov, but in reality, it was a three-part symphony of effort, intelligence, and skill. This brings up a common counter-argument. It's easy to look at the highlight reels, which are filled with Kharlamov dancing through entire teams, and conclude that he was a solo act who would have been a superstar, no matter who his line mates were. And while his talent was certainly transcendent, that view misses the point of the Soviet system and the genius of this particular line. Kharlamov's magic was enabled by the brilliance of his partners. Without Mikhailov's relentless puck retrieval, Kharlamov would have spent half his shifts chasing the puck instead of attacking with it. Without Petrov's calming presence, his puck protection, and his cerebral playmaking, Kharlamov would have faced defenses that were set and waiting for him. Petrov and Mikhailov didn't just support Kharlamov. They created the very conditions necessary for his artistry to exist. They were the rhythm section that laid down a perfect groove, allowing their lead guitarist to soar with an unforgettable solo. The success and longevity of this troika, which dominated world hockey for the better part of a decade, is the ultimate testament to the Soviet philosophy. Even the brightest star shines brightest as part of a brilliant constellation. And there was no greater stage for that constellation to shine than the Montreal Forum on September 2nd, 1972. You have to transport yourself back to that night. The air in the Forum is thick with cigarette smoke and an unshakable sense of national arrogance. This isn't just a hockey game, it's a coronation. Team Canada, a roster of NHL gods, is here to skate circles around these mysterious amateurs from the other side of the Iron Curtain and reaffirm their natural right as the world's best. The pre-series predictions from the Canadian press weren't just confident, they were dismissive. With many experts forecasting an 8-games-to-none sweep, the nation was settled in for a party within the first periods of that game. Valeri Kharlamov and his line mates would turn that party into a funeral. What unfolded wasn't just a display of superior skill, it was a tactical demolition. Kharlamov's performance that night was a masterclass in exploiting the rigid, predictable patterns of North American defense. At the time, NHL defensemen were taught a very specific doctrine: maintain your gap, force the attacker to the outside along the boards, and when the moment comes, physically eliminate them from the play with a punishing body check. It was a system built to defend against the north-south, power-based attack. Kharlamov simply refused to play their game. He didn't operate in straight lines. His attack was a symphony of lateral movement, sudden stops, and explosive changes of pace that the Canadian defenders, for all their talent and experience, had no answer for. Let's go back to that first goal we touched on earlier, but let's break it down with a microscope. The play starts with Vladimir Petrov carrying the puck through the neutral zone with his head up. You'll see him dish a simple pass to his left, leading a streaking Kharlamov, who receives it in full flight right at the red line. Now, watch his skates. This is the key. Canadian defenseman Donneray slides over to take the angle, expecting Kharlamov to try and use his speed to go wide, down the boards. That's the standard NHL play. Kharlamov shows him that look for a split second, forcing Ray to commit his weight and turn his hips toward the boards. But it's a setup. The instant Ray commits, Kharlamov digs in with his inside edge and cuts back against the grain so sharply that it looks like a glitch in the film. Ray is now completely off balance, effectively removed from the play without ever being touched. Kharlamov is in on goal, and before Ken Dryden can even set himself, the puck is behind him. In his autobiography, Dryden wrote that he just saw a blur of red. The speed itself was terrifying, but it was the unpredictable application of that speed that made it lethal. If the first goal was a silent dagger, the second one was the thunderclap that announced a new world order in hockey. This goal was pure predatory instinct combined with sublime skill. It begins with a Canadian mistake. Defenseman Gary Bergman, a solid veteran, is controlling the puck at the Soviet blue line, but he fumbles it for just a fraction of a second. That's all the invitation Kharlamov needs. He pounces on the loose puck like a hawk, What happens next is a perfect illustration of his explosive acceleration. He goes from a controlled glide to his absolute top speed in about 3 strides. Bergman, to his credit, recovers and begins a desperate chase back towards his own net. It's a foot race, but it's not a fair one. Bergman is a good NHL skater, but Kharlamov possesses a gear that very few players in history have ever had. He easily creates separation. Now he's one-on-one with Ken Dryden. Bergman is diving in a last-ditch effort to disrupt the play from behind. Lesser players might rush the shot or get flustered. Kharlamov displays an almost supernatural calm. As he closes in, he fakes a shot to his forehand, forcing Dryden to react and Bergman to slide past the net. In one fluid motion, he pulls the puck to his backhand and, while still moving at incredible speed, lifts it perfectly over the sprawling goaltender. It was a goal of breathtaking audacity and precision. In the aftermath of the 7-3 loss, the narrative from the Canadian side was predictable. They said they were out of shape. They said they took the Soviets lightly. They said their own hubris was the cause of defeat. And while there is certainly truth to their overconfidence, using it as the sole explanation is a massive disservice to the genius they had just witnessed. To chalk that loss up to a simple lack of conditioning is to ignore the paradigm shift that happened on the ice. The reality is, no amount of training camp wind sprints could have prepared Team Canada for the style of hockey the Soviets played. It was a fundamental clash of philosophies. Canada's physical, individualistic, straight-line game was systematically dismantled by a fluid, collective, and creative opponent who used the entire 200-foot surface of the ice as their canvas. Team Canada didn't just lose because they were unprepared, they lost because, on that night, they were outthought, outmaneuvered, and utterly outclassed by a magician in a red helmet who had just changed the game of hockey forever. We've talked about the blur of red that Ken Dryden saw, the ghost-like figure who seemed to vanish just as a defenseman committed. But to really appreciate the genius, you have to put the film under the microscope. Let's move beyond the poetic descriptions and get into the science of it. The pure biomechanics of what made Valeri Kharlamov move in a way that seemed to defy the laws of physics. His skating wasn't just fast, it was a revolutionary blend of power, balance, and efficiency that became the technical foundation for his entire game. When you deconstruct it, you'll find it's built on 3 fundamental pillars that worked in perfect harmony. The first, and most visually obvious, is his exceptionally low center of gravity. Kharlamov was not a big man. He stood about 5'8", but he turned this into a massive advantage when he skated at top speed. You'll notice he'd get into this deep, powerful crouch, with his back almost parallel to the ice. This wasn't just a stylistic quirk, it was a physical principle at work. By lowering his center of gravity so dramatically, he achieved a level of stability that was almost impossible to disrupt. A taller, more upright skater is easier to knock off balance. Think of trying to push over a tall, thin lamp versus a low, wide coffee table. Kharlamov was the coffee table. Defenders who tried to hit him often found they deconnect with his shoulder or hip and just bounce off, while Kharlamov would absorb the contact without breaking stride. This incredible balance was the bedrock of his ability to navigate through heavy traffic. The second pillar was his explosive, almost superhuman leg strength. And this is where you have to call back to Anatoly Tarasov's brutal training regimen. We discussed earlier, remember those stories of players doing frog jumps up stadium steps, sometimes carrying a teammate? That wasn't just for general conditioning. That was specifically designed to build the powerful quadriceps, glutes, and hamstrings needed for hockey acceleration. For Kharlamov, this translated into an absolutely lethal first 3 strides. In hockey, your top-end speed is one thing, but your ability to get to that speed from a near standstill is what creates separation. You can see it time and time again in the footage. Kharlamov will be in a controlled glide, lulling the defense into a false sense of security, and then boom, in 3 explosive pushes, he's at full flight and has opened up a 5-foot gap on his checker. That power didn't come from nowhere. It was forged in the furnace of Tarasov's training camps. The third and most technically brilliant pillar was his masterful use of his skate edges. This is what elevated him from just a great skater to a transcendent one. Most hockey players, even at the professional level, are more comfortable turning and cutting on their inside edges. It's a more natural movement. Kharlamov had no preference. He was an absolute virtuoso on both his inside and outside edges, and he could transition between them seamlessly. This is what made him so impossibly deceptive. A defenseman is trained to read a player's hips, shoulders, and skates to anticipate which way they're going to go. With Kharlamov, there were no tells. He could be skating directly at you and with no discernible change in his upper body posture. Make a razor sharp cut to his left using his right skate as outside edge, a move that is incredibly difficult to execute at high speed. This ambidextrous edge work meant that for a defender, guessing which way he'd go was a 50-50th proposition, and if you guessed wrong, he was gone. There is a legendary play from the 1974 Summit series that perfectly encapsulates all of these elements working together. You can find the clip easily. Kharlamov is carrying the puck behind the Canadian net with speed. He's being hounded by none other than Bobby Clarke, one of the most tenacious checkers in the game. Clarke gets his stick in on Kharlamov's skates, and Kharlamov starts to go down. For 99.9% of players, the play is over right there. But watch what he does. As he falls, he doesn't flail or lose control. He rotates his torso, plants his left hand on the ice like a gymnast, and uses it as a pivot point. His skates never stop working. His leg strength and core control allow him to pop right back up to his feet in a single, fluid motion, never losing possession of the puck. He then continues the play and sets up a scoring chance. It's an unbelievable display of balance, strength, and improvisation. It's a move that simply should not be possible. Now, this brings up a common counter-argument you'll hear when discussing the great skaters of that era. People will bring up a player like Bobby Hull, the Golden Jet, who was famous for his blazing end-to-end speed, and they'd be right. If you were having a straight line race from blue line to blue line, Hull might very well win. He was like a drag racer and absolute rocket with the throttle wide open. But a hockey rink isn't a drag strip. It's a dynamic, chaotic environment. Kharlamov was more like a Formula One car. He may not have had a higher top speed, but his ability to accelerate, decelerate, and change direction at high velocity was unparalleled. His skating was more functional. Hull's speed was a weapon you used in open ice. Kharlamov's skating was a master key that could unlock any defense in the tightest of spaces. It was this elusive, four-way mobility that made him the far more terrifying player to defend against, and it was the brush he used to paint his masterpieces on the ice. So we've established the foundation of skating, that impossible blend of balance, power, and edge work that allowed him to navigate the ice unlike anyone else. But that otherworldly mobility would be almost useless in a hockey game if you couldn't bring the puck along for the ride. And this is the next layer of the Kharlamov genius we need to dissect. His stick handling and puck control were perfectly, almost supernaturally, synchronized with his feet. It's one thing to be a great skater and another to be a great stick handler. To be both, to have your hands move in perfect unison with your feet at top speed, is the mark of true greatness. When you analyze his puck handling, the first thing you'll notice is what it isn't. In the modern era, you're used to seeing spectacular displays of dangling. You think of a player like Pavel, the Magic Man, with his mesmerizing dekes, or Patrick Kane making the puck dance. On the end of his stick, their style is often about wide, audacious moves designed to embarrass a single defender. Kharlamov's approach was fundamentally different. His genius was rooted in subtlety, efficiency, and puck protection. He rarely made a big, flashy move. Instead, you'll see him keep the puck in a very tight cradle, close to his skates. The puck looks like it's on a string, a mere extension of his body. Why was this so effective? Because he let his skating do the heavy lifting. He need to dangle through a player because his explosive cutbacks and changes of pace had already put the defender on their heels. His hands were used for the final, precise deception. He understood that the further the puck is from your body, the more vulnerable it is to a stick check. By keeping it in his feet, protected by his body position and his low center of gravity, he made it nearly impossible to strip the puck from him cleanly. He would use his body, his skates, and his free arm as shields, creating a protective bubble around the puck. His stick handling wasn't the primary weapon. It was the guidance system for the missile his body had already become. This method of puck protection became a cornerstone of the entire Soviet puck possession system. Let's look at a specific tactic that he mastered, which was more about mental deception than pure physical skill, the head fake or the look off. This is where you really see his incredible hockey intelligence shine. Pull up a clip of him carrying the puck over the blue line on a 3-on-2 rush. You'll see him coming down his natural left wing, but he's not staring down at the puck, and he's not staring at the goalie. His head is up, and he's making direct, obvious eye contact with Boris Mikhailov, who is streaking down the far right side. He's selling the cross-ice pass with his entire being. Now, watch the effect this has. You can see the defenseman in the middle shift his weight and angle his stick to take away that passing lane. You can see the goalie start to cheat ever so slightly to his left, anticipating that he'll have to slide across to face a shot from Mikhailov. In that instant, with just his eyes, Kharlamov has manipulated the position of key opponents. He has created a new reality on the ice, having sold them the fake. He now uses the tiny lane he's just manufactured for himself. Without ever changing his speed, he pulls the puck in slightly and releases a lightning quick wrist shot. That beats the goalie on the short side, the very side the goalie just vacated. It's a goal that was scored not with his hands, but with his mind. This brings us to a crucial counter-argument regarding what constitutes great. Hence, a modern fan might watch Kharlamov and then watch a Patrick Kane highlight reel and think Kane's skills are superior because they are more spectacular. Kane can pull the puck through a defender's skates, spin around, and score on the backhand. It's breathtaking, must-see stuff, but this isn't a question of who is better, but a question of differing philosophies. Kane's dekes are often high-risk, high-reward plays designed to create a scoring chance for himself out of nothing. It's an individualistic brilliance. Kharlamov's puck control served a different purpose. It was a lower-risk style designed to maintain possession for his entire unit. He wasn't always trying to beat his man one-on-one. He was often just trying to protect the puck long enough to draw a second defender towards him, thereby creating an opening for Petrov or Mikhailov. His stick handling was in service of the team's relentless puck possession game. The dreaded Soviet cycle, it was less of a solo and more of a symphony. So while it may not have produced as many jaw-dropping individual dangles for the highlight packages, his method was, in many ways, even more terrifying for an opposing team. You couldn't get the puck off him. His line would enter the zone and could maintain possession for 30, 45, even 60 seconds, calmly passing, cycling, and waiting, while the defending team chased and tired themselves out. And it was all built on Kharlamov's ability to protect that puck in traffic using his body, his skates, and his incredibly efficient hands. Waiting for the precise moment the defense finally cracked. It wasn't about embarrassing you, it was about methodically suffocating you until you made a fatal mistake. So you have this player who is impossible to hit cleanly because of his balance. He's impossible to strip the puck from because of his masterful control. His skating and hockey mind operate on a completely different plane from everyone else on the ice. He has spent the first 5 games of the most important hockey series ever played systematically dissecting your best defenders and making your goaltenders look foolish. Your team Canada. It's 1972, you're in Moscow, your national pride is shattered, and you are on the brink of a humiliating defeat. So, what do? If you can't outskill the magician, what's your next move? The answer, as it turned out, was brutally simple. If you can't stop the man, you break him. This brings us to one of the most infamous and controversial moments in hockey history, the Bobby Clarke incident in Game 6. To understand this moment, you have to understand that it was more than just a dirty play. It was the physical manifestation of the series' central conflict. It was a clash of civilizations played out on a sheet of ice. On one side, you had the Soviet philosophy of hockey as a form of high art, a game of skill, precision, and collective creativity. On the other, you had the North American ethos of grit, intimidation, and a win-at-all-costs mentality. When Team Canada realized they couldn't win playing the Soviets' game, they decided to force the Soviets to play theirs. And their game involved a level of violence that the Soviets were completely unprepared for. Let's set the scene. It's Game 6 at the Luzhniki Ice Palace in Moscow. The series is tied, but the Soviets have the momentum. Valeri Kharlamov has arguably been the best player for either side. He's a marked man. Every time he touches the puck, he's being hooked, held, and harassed. Team Canada, under coach Harry Sinden, has made a clear strategic adjustment to play a far more aggressive, intimidating style. The play itself is almost mundane, which makes the violence of it even more shocking. It's in the second period, in the neutral zone, away from the main action. Kharlamov has the puck and chips it past Bobby Clarke, captain of the Philadelphia Flyers and one of the toughest, most tenacious players in the NHL. As Kharlamov skates past him, Clarke, without hesitation, turns and delivers a vicious, two-handed slash that connects squarely with the back of Kharlamov's left ankle. You can see it on the grainy footage. This is not a stick check. This is not a battle for the puck. The puck is long gone. This is a targeted assault. Kharlamov crumples to the ice in agony. Incredibly, no penalty is called. He manages to get to his feet and tries to skate to the bench, testing his ankle. As he does, Clark skates by and gives him another hard chop on the exact same spot. The second slash is the one that removes all doubt. It erases any possibility of this being an accident in the heat of play. It was deliberate. It was calculated. It was a message. Kharlamov suffered a fractured ankle. He would miss Game 7 entirely and play in Game 8 as a mere shadow of himself, hobbled and ineffective. The magician's wand had been broken. Now, we have to address the counter-argument, the justification for this act that has been a part of hockey lore for decades. In the years since, both Clark and his teammates have openly admitted the slash was intentional. Assistant coach John Ferguson, a legendary tough guy in his own right, reportedly said to Clark on the bench, "He's killing us. I think he needs a tap on the ankle." Clark, ever the loyal soldier, obliged. The justification is that this was war. It wasn't just a game. It was a battle for national and ideological supremacy. And in war, you do what is necessary to win. From this perspective, Clark wasn't a villain. He was a warrior who made a difficult but necessary tactical decision to neutralize the enemy's most dangerous weapon. But this is where you have to ask the question, where is the line? Where does tough, hard-nosed hockey end and cynical, premeditated assault begin? While hockey is and always will be a physically demanding and often violent sport, the act of deliberately trying to injure an opponent to remove them from the game crosses a significant ethical boundary. The Clark slash wasn't about toughness in the traditional sense. It wasn't about taking a punch to make a play or blocking a shot. It was an admission of defeat. It was Team Canada's tacit acknowledgement that they could not contain the skill of Valeri Kharlamov through legitimate hockey means. It exposed a dark undercurrent in the North American game, a belief that supreme skill was something to be feared, and if it couldn't be matched, it had to be destroyed. It was the highest form of respect that an opponent like Bobby Clark could pay to a player like Valeri Kharlamov. It was a confession that his talent was so transcendent, so far beyond what they were prepared for, that the only solution was to take him out. Canada would go on to win that series in dramatic fashion, with Paul Henderson's legendary goal in the final minute of Game 8, but that victory will forever be shadowed by a giant asterisk, and by the lingering question of what might have been if the Soviets' greatest artist had been allowed to finish his masterpiece. Because of the intense political drama, the incredible storylines, and the sheer shock of it all, the 1970 to Summit Series has become the defining event of Valeri Kharlamov's career. At least in the eyes of North America, it's the lens through which he is almost always viewed. But to focus only on those 8 games is to miss the forest for the trees. It's like judging a legendary film director based on a single, iconic scene, or a master novelist on one famous chapter. That series was his explosive introduction to the West. But the true body of his work, the foundation of his immortal legacy, was built year after year on a different stage, the IIHF World Championships. For European hockey, the annual World Championship tournament was, and in many ways still is, the absolute pinnacle of the sport. While North America was laser focused on the Stanley Cup, the best players in the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, Sweden, and Finland circled this date on their calendar. This was their holy grail, and for the better part of a decade, Valeri Kharlamov was its undisputed king. His record in this tournament is simply staggering. In 11 appearances, he led the Soviet national team to 8 gold medals, 2 silvers, and 1 bronze. This wasn't a single, brilliant flash in the pan. This was a sustained, methodical, and relentless dynasty, and Kharlamov, along with his troika, was its beating heart. This was the arena where he consistently proved, year in and year out, that he was the most dominant and dangerous forward on the planet. Let us zero in on a specific tournament to see this sustained excellence in action. The 1976 World Championships, held in Katowice, Poland. By this point, Kharlamov is no longer a mystery. The hockey world knows exactly who he is and what he's capable of. He's coming off the 72 and 70 for Summit Series and the legendary Super Series tour against NHL clubs. He is a marked man in every single game. The primary rival for the Soviets during this era was the formidable team from Czechoslovakia, a squad stacked with incredible talent that would, in fact, win the gold medal this particular year. The battles between these two teams were hockey at its most intense, technically brilliant. strategically complex and simmering with Cold War animosity. This is the environment in which the 27-year-old Kharlamov put on an absolute clinic. You can watch the footage and see a player at the absolute peak of his powers. He's not just the flashy, speedy kid from 1970 anymore. His game has matured. He is a veteran leader who now controls the entire flow of the game when he is on the ice. He finished the tournament as the leading scorer, was named the best forward by the IIHF Directorate, and was a lock for the media all-star team. You'll see him orchestrating the power play with incredible patience, using that look-off we discussed earlier to move defenders out of position before setting up a teammate for a perfect scoring chance. He's still capable of those breathtaking end-to-end rushes, but now he picks his spots. He plays a more cerebral game, dominating the cycle down low, protecting the puck, and drawing penalties out of sheer frustration from his opponents. This 1976 performance demonstrates that his brilliance wasn't an anomaly, it was his baseline. Now, this is where you inevitably encounter the North American-centric counter-argument. You'll hear some fans and even old-school analysts say, sure, he dominated the World Championships, but that wasn't against the best. The NHL's top stars, the guys like Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito, and Guy Lafleur, were all busy with the Stanley Cup playoffs. The implication is that the World Championship was a secondary, B-level tournament. But this viewpoint is a classic case of cultural and sporting bias. It completely misunderstands the context of the time. For the Soviet Union and its rivals, winning the World Championship was a matter of immense national pride and a key piece of political propaganda. They sent their absolute best every single year. These were not amateur teams, they were full-time, state-sponsored professionals who trained together year-round for these events. To dismiss the Czechoslovaks, the Swedes, or the Finns of that era is to ignore some of the greatest players in the history of the sport who simply didn't play in the NHL. The intensity of a USSR versus Czechoslovakia final was every bit as fierce and hard-fought as any Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. So while it's true that the tournament didn't feature every single NHL superstar, to suggest that Kharlamov's dominance there is somehow diminished is fundamentally flawed. He wasn't just beating up on lesser competition. He was consistently proving his superiority against the best professional players the rest of the world had to offer. Ultimately, you have to reframe your perspective. Kharlamov's performances against NHL competition in 72, 74, and the Super Series weren't the events that made him great. They were simply the moments that proved his pre-existing greatness. To a skeptical North American audience, for the rest of the hockey world, this was old news. They had been watching the magician put on a show for years. The World Championships were his kingdom, and his decade of dominance there is the true, unshakable foundation of his legend. So while Valeri Kharlamov was busy cementing his legacy year after year at the World Championships, a new kind of storm was brewing back in North America. The hockey landscape had changed. A brash, upstart rival league, the World Hockey Association, or WHA, had emerged to challenge the NHL's long-held monopoly. They were raiding NHL rosters, offering huge contracts, and had successfully lured away some of the game's biggest stars. And by 1974, after watching the drama and success of the 72 series, the WHA wanted its own shot at the title. They assembled their own Team Canada, a squad of WHA All-Stars, and threw down the gauntlet for a second summit series. For Kharlamov and the Soviets, this presented a fascinating and entirely different kind of challenge. The 1970 NHL team was built on a foundation of grit, defensive structure, and intimidation. It was a grinding, often brutal style of hockey. The WA, by contrast, was a league built for offense. It was a faster, more wide-open, run-and-gun style of game. This 1970 for Canadian team was stacked with offensive firepower, featuring legendary players who hadn't been a part of the 72 series. Suddenly, on the other side of the ice, Kharlamov was facing the legendary Golden Jet, Bobby Hull, whose blistering slap shot was the stuff of myth. He was facing Frank Mahovlich again, the Big M, who had defected to the WHA, and in one of the most incredible stories in sports history, he was facing Mr. Hockey himself, a 46-year-old Gordie Howe, who was playing on a line with his two sons, Mark and Marty. This series was the ultimate test of Kharlamov's adaptability. Could his game, which had so expertly picked apart the rigid defense of the NHL, be equally effective in a high-flying track meet against some of the greatest scorers of all time? The answer was an emphatic yes. The open ice and offensive pace of the WHA style didn't neutralize him, it unleashed him. In the tighter checking 72 series, his goals often came from brilliant, lightning quick solo rushes. In 74, with more room to operate, you see his genius as a playmaker, a distributor, and a puppeteer come to the forefront. He demonstrated that he could dominate a game with or without putting the puck in the net himself. A perfect example of this can be found in Game 6 of the series in Moscow. The Soviets are in control, and you can see Kharlamov orchestrating the play like a conductor. On one particular rush, he leads a 3-on-1 break into the Canadian zone. Now, the 1970 version of Kharlamov probably sees this as a prime opportunity to use his speed and hands to challenge the lone defenseman and score a highlight reel goal. But this is the more mature, more cerebral Kharlamov. As he crosses the blue line, you can see him processing the geometry of the play. He knows he has Alexander Yakushev, a brilliant goal scorer, on his right, and a trailing player coming up the middle. The one defenseman, past Stapleton, is in an impossible position. Kharlamov uses his eyes and body language to sell the shot, forcing Stapleton to commit and the goalie, Jerry Cheevers, to square up to him. At the very last possible second, just as Stapleton lunges, Kharlamov softly pulls the puck back and lays a perfect no-look drop pass into the high slot for the trailing forward, who fires it into a wide-open net. It was a goal born of pure hockey IQ, patience, and unselfishness. He didn't just create a scoring chance. He created a guaranteed goal by manipulating the defense into giving him exactly what he wanted. Now, we have to address the common counter-argument that you'll hear from many hockey historians, which is that the 1974 series is often treated as the less important sequel to the 1970 blockbuster. The narrative is that the Woe was a weaker league, that the series lacked the raw, patriotic emotio, and in the first one, and that is ultimately a footnote. But this perspective fundamentally undervalues the talent on that WHA team. Let me say it again, Bobby Hull and Gordie Howe. You are talking about two of the 5 greatest forwards to ever play the game on the ice at the same time against the Soviets. Add in Hall of Famers like Cheevers and Mahavlich and heroes from 72 like Paul Henderson, and you have a roster that was absolutely loaded with elite skill. To dismiss this competition is absurd. Furthermore, the result of this series was far more decisive, and in 1972, the Soviets didn't win. On a last-minute goal in the final game, they dominated. The final tally over the 8 games was for wins for the Soviets, 1 for Canada, and 3 ties. They proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that 1972 was not a fluke. Kharlamov, who finished the series with 2 goals and 6 assists, tying for the team lead in points, was once again a primary architect of that victory. Far from being a historical footnote, the 1974 Summit series is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It proved that Kharlamov's genius wasn't system-dependent or opponent-specific. It didn't matter if you tried to grind him down with defense and intimidation or open up the ice and tried to outscore him. He was a universal problem for North American hockey, and in the epic series, against 2 different leagues with 2 different philosophies, they had found no solution. We've seen Valeri Kharlamov dominate 2 different kinds of North American all-star teams. We've examined his individual skills, the skating, the stick handling under a microscope, but to truly understand why he played the way he did, why his movements seemed so fluid and unpredictable, we have to go back to the source. We have to revisit his mentor, the architect of the Red Army machine, Anatoly Tarasov. You can't separate Kharlamov the player from the revolutionary philosophy that shaped him. We've talked about Tarasov's brutal training methods, but now we need to look at the beautiful, complex theory that all that hard work was designed to serve. Tarasov's vision for hockey was a radical departure from the established norms of the game. In North America, hockey was largely a game of defined roles and straight lines. You were a left winger, a center, or a right winger. You had your lane, your patch of ice, your specific responsibilities. It was a structured, powerful, and often predictable style. Tarasov saw this as a creative straitjacket. He envisioned a different kind of game, one that was fluid, dynamic, and improvisational. His core concept was a principle he called kombinacija, which translates roughly to combination play. But it was more than just passing. It was a philosophy of constant motion, total interchangeability of position, and the creation of flowing, triangular patterns all over the ice. In Tarasov's system, you weren't just a left winger, you were a forward. If the play flowed to the right side, you were expected to flow with it, filling in space. rotating with your teammates to create new passing options. He famously hated it when his players stood still. He believed that the player without the puck was just as important as the player with it, because their movement is what dictated the geometry of the attack and created confusion for the defense. He compared his ideal hockey team not to a military unit, but to a jazz ensemble. The players all know the basic structure of the song, the system, but within that framework, they are free to improvise their solos, to react and create in the moment, to play off one another in a beautiful, unscripted harmony. To see this philosophy in action, all you have to do is watch footage of the Kharlamov-Mikhailov line cycling the puck in the offensive zone. It's mesmerizing. If you try to follow them based on traditional positions, you'll be lost in seconds. You'll see Kharlamov, the nominal left winger, carrying the puck behind the net and emerging on the right wing boards. As he does this, Mikhailov, the right winger, isn't standing at the net waiting for a pass. He's cutting through the high slot, drawing a defenseman with him. The Trov, the center, might drift back to the blue line to act as a safety valve, or he might dive down low to the space Kharlamov just vacated. They are in constant rotation. They form a fluid, ever-shifting triangle around the puck. For a defending team used to a man-on-man system, this was a nightmare. Who do you cover? If you follow your man, the winger, he'll drag you completely out of position, and one of his teammates will immediately flow into the dangerous space you just left open. This organized chaos was designed to methodically break down even the most disciplined defensive structures by creating seams and mismatches. Through perpetual motion now, a traditionalist North American coach from that era would look at this and see a complete lack of discipline. They would see players abandoning their positions, floating all over the ice, and seemingly ignoring their defensive duties. It would look like a chaotic free-for-all. But this is the crucial counter-argument. It wasn't chaos, it was simply a higher, more complex form of order. The discipline in Tarasov's system wasn't about staying in your lane. The discipline was in reading the play and anticipating your teammates' movements, and in trusting that if you rotated into a new position, one of them would seamlessly rotate to cover yours. This artistic freedom wasn't just given, it was earned. The reason Tarasov's training was so punishing was to build the physical and mental foundation necessary for this demanding system to work. You had to be in world-class cardiovascular shape to handle the constant skating. You had to possess an elite hockey IQ to process the game at high speed. And most importantly, you had to have a near telepathic chemistry with your line mates. A chemistry that was forged through thousands of hours of practicing together, on and off the ice. This system was built on a bedrock of trust. It was freedom within a highly disciplined framework. And that's what made it so potent. Valeri Kharlamov was the ultimate embodiment of this entire philosophy. He had the otherworldly, physical tools, the skating, the hands to execute the plays. He had the brilliant hockey mind to read the evolving patterns and see openings before they appeared. And he had the creative soul of an artist, the willingness to improvise, to try the unexpected, audacious play. He wasn't just a cog in the Red Army machine. He was the system made flesh. Tarasov was a composer who wrote the symphony of Soviet hockey, but it was Kharlamov who was the virtuoso first violin, the one who could take that music and make it soar to heights no one had ever imagined. You have this revolutionary philosophy of hockey, this intricate system of combinancia we just dissected, and you have the perfect player in Valeri Kharlamov to serve as its on-ice embodiment. We've seen this combination overwhelm all-star teams from both the NHL and the WA, but the ultimate test remained. How would this system, executed not by a hand-picked national team, but by a single club CSKA Moscow, the Red Army team, fare against the very best, most dominant club team in the entire NHL? The hockey world got its answer in a game that has since become the stuff of legend. The date was New Year's Eve, 1975. The place was the Montreal Forum. The matchup was the CSKA Red Army versus the Montreal Canadiens. This was the marquee event of the 1975-76 Super Series, a tour where the top Soviet clubs played against a gauntlet of NHL elites, and this game, in particular, was seen as the unofficial World Club Championship. These were the two greatest hockey dynasties on the planet. The Canadiens of the mid-1970s were an absolute juggernaut. You're talking about a team with 10 future Hall of Famers on its roster. They had the breathtaking offensive firepower of Guy Lafleur, the impenetrable goaltending of Ken Dryden, and the legendary Big Three on defense with Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, and Guy Lapointe. They were a perfect fusion of speed, skill, and structure. This game was more than just a contest. It was a summit meeting between two completely different, yet equally brilliant, paths to hockey excellence. It was a living, breathing debate over the best way to play the game. In one corner, you had the Canadians, who played a high-pressure, puck possession game built on overwhelming speed and a relentless forecheck, all within a well-defined system. In the other, you had CSKA, the masters of Tarasov's fluid, improvisational style, a team that could hold the puck for minutes at a time, patiently waiting for the perfect opening. The result was arguably the highest level of hockey ever witnessed, a 3-3 tie that felt more profound and satisfying than any victory could have. And in a game filled with superstars on both sides, it was Valeri Kharlamov who produced the single most spectacular moment of individual genius. Let's break down his second period goal. CSKA is on the attack. The puck is worked down into the corner to a young forward named Boris Alexandrov. Kharlamov, reading the play, is cutting hard towards the slot, looking for a pass. Alexandrov sends it out in front, but the pass isn't perfect. It's slightly behind Kharlamov in his skates. For almost any other player in the world, this is a broken play. They'd have to stop, try to kick the puck to their stick, and by then the defenseman would be on top of them and the chance would be gone. But what you see Kharlamov do next is just breathtaking. He doesn't fight the puck's momentum, he incorporates it into his own movement. In one seamless, impossibly fluid motion, he reaches back with his stick to collect the puck, and as he does, he allows his body to spin a full 360 degrees of pirouettes on ice skates at full speed. As he comes out of the spin, his body and the puck are now perfectly aligned, facing the net. Before Ken Dryden, one of the greatest goalies who ever lived, can even process what has just happened and reset his position, Kharlamov has snapped a perfect shot over his glove and into the top corner. It was a goal of such staggering athletic grace, coordination, and improvisation that it left the entire arena speechless. Dryden himself would later call it one of the most brilliant and beautiful goals ever scored on him. Now, for decades, the North American narrative of this game has been dominated by one statistic, the shot clock, which read 38-13 in favor of Montreal. You'll hear the counter-argument that the Canadians were the far superior team that night, that they dominated play, and that they were simply robbed by the spectacular goaltending of a young Vladislav Tretiak. But to focus solely on the shot count is to fundamentally misunderstand the philosophical battle that was taking place on the ice. The Canadian system was predicated on generating a high volume of shots from everywhere, creating chaos and rebound opportunities. The Soviet system was the polar opposite. It was about patience and puck possession above all else. They would willingly pass up a low percentage shot from the point in favor of making three, or for more passes to try and create a tap-in goal. So while Montreal certainly had the puck in the offensive zone more and generated more attempts, CSKA's puck possession game meant that when they did get a chance, it was often a grade A, premium scoring opportunity. The game wasn't about who was better in a vacuum. It was about the flawless teams executing their opposing strategies to perfection. Neither could force the other to break. The 3-3 score was not an aberration, it was the fairest possible result, a testament to two hockey ideologies meeting at their absolute zenith and playing to a magnificent stalemate. The Montreal crowd, notoriously tough and knowledgeable, recognized this. At the final buzzer, they rose as one and gave both teams a long, thunderous standing ovation, a show of respect for the sublime hockey they had just witnessed. On a legendary night, on a legendary stage, Kharlamov's goal was the artistic signature on a masterpiece co-authored by the two greatest teams in the world. If the game in Montreal was a symphony, a sublime and respectful dialogue between the hockey masters, then the game played 11 days later in Philadelphia was a back alley brawl. After the beauty came the beast. On January 11, 1976, CSKA Moscow's North American tour took them to the Philadelphia Spectrum, the infamous home of the two-time defending Stanley Cup champions, the Philadelphia Flyers. But nobody called them the Philadelphia Flyers to the entire hockey world. They were the Broad Street Bullies, and they had built their dynasty on a foundation of skill, to be sure, but also on a level of systematic violence and intimidation that the league had never before seen. This was not going to be a dialogue. This was going to be a mugging. The matchup represented the most extreme clash of hockey ideologies imaginable. You had the free-flowing, artistic, puck possession game of the Soviets. A style we've established was built on perpetual motion and creativity, and you had the Flyers, a team that, under their brilliant and cunning coach Fred Sherrill, had perfected a strategy of neutralizing skill through overwhelming physical force. This wasn't just tough, grinding hockey. This was a calculated philosophy. The Flyers' game plan was to punish every opposing player who touched the puck, to finish every check with malicious intent, and to create an environment of such chaos and fear that the other team as skilled players would be too busy looking over their shoulders to make creative plays. It was the Bobby Clarke incident from 1972, but expanded into a team-wide, 60-minute strategy. From the moment the puck dropped, you can see the Flyers executing their game plan to perfection. They are on the Soviets relentlessly. Every pass is contested. Every puck battle is a scrum. They are finishing checks with brutal authority. The fluid, beautiful passing plays that CSKA had used to carve up other NHL teams evaporate. The Soviet players look hesitant, rattled. They can't find their rhythm because there is no rhythm to be found, only a constant barrage of physical harassment. And then, midway through the first period, with the game still scoreless, comes the moment that would define the entire event. Let's break down the play, or rather, the non-play. Valeri Kharlamov is skating through the neutral zone. Crucially, you have to note that he does not have the puck. The puck is long gone. Flyers defenseman Ed Van Impe, a rugged, hard-nosed veteran, sees him. Van Impe leaves his defensive position, lines Kharlamov up, and launches himself into a devastating, blindside body check. Kharlamov never sees it coming. He is absolutely flattened, his helmet flying off as he crashes to the ice. He lies there, motionless, for several seconds. It is a clear, textbook case of interference, a blatant penalty by any rulebook, and the referee's arm does not go up. No penalty is called. For the Soviets, this was the final straw. For their coach, Konstantin Lokhdev, this wasn't hockey anymore. This was a deliberate attempt to injure his star player, sanctioned by the inaction of the on-ice officials. In a move that stunned the hockey world, Lokhdev pulled his team from the ice. He gestured for them to follow him, and they skated off, down the tunnel, and back to their locker room in protest. The game came to a screeching halt. What followed was a tense, politically charged standoff that lasted for nearly 20 minutes. The Flyers' fiery owner, Ed Snyder, got involved, reportedly threatening to withhold payment from the Soviets for the entire series if they didn't return to the ice. The message from the North American side was clear. This is our building. This is our league. You play by our rules, or you don't play at all. Now, we have to look at the counter-argument from the Flyers' perspective, a narrative that their fans still proudly defend to this day. They would argue that they were simply playing Flyers hockey. This was the same aggressive, intimidating style that had made them champions. They weren't doing anything different against the Soviets than they did against the Boston Bruins or the New York Rangers. The Soviets, from their point of view, were simply soft. They couldn't handle the physical rigors of a true NHL game, and when the going got tough, they took their puck and went home. But this perspective oversimplifies the issue. The Soviet protest wasn't about physicality itself. It was about a specific kind of physicality. They were used to tough, physical games against the Czechoslovaks and Swedes. The issue here was the repeated, deliberate targeting of players with illegal hits away from the puck. The Van Impe hit wasn't a hard check in a puck battle. It was a calculated assault. The Soviets left the ice not because they were afraid of being hit, but because they believed the fundamental contract of the game, that it would be governed by a shared set of rules, had been broken. It was a protest against the style of play that they felt was a violation of the spirit of the sport. Eventually, the Soviets were coaxed back onto the ice, but the game was already over. You can see the change in their body language. They played the rest of the night tentatively. The fluid combinatio was gone, replaced by a cautious, fearful style. They were getting rid of the puck quickly, afraid to hold onto it and become a target. The Flyers' strategy had worked perfectly. They won the game for one. The intimidation had completely suffocated the skill. This game, when placed beside the Montreal masterpiece, showed the dipolar extremes of the North American response to Soviet genius. One team met skill with skill and co-authored a work of art. The other met skill with a club and beat it into submission. For Kharlamov, it was yet another painful lesson on this side of the Atlantic. Brilliance could always be answered with brutality. We've spent a lot of time on the physical aspects of the game, the explosive skating, the mesmerizing hints. We've talked about the Montreal Symphony and the Philadelphia Brawl, and the brutal physical price Valeri Kharlamov often paid for his brilliance. But if you focus only on his athletic gifts, you're missing the forest for the trees. You're missing what might have been his single greatest weapon, the one attribute that elevated all the others from brilliant to transcendent, his mind. Let us move beyond the muscles and the motion and get into the processor that was running the whole operation. Let's talk about Valeri Kharlamov's hockey IQ. His most dominant skill was not in his feet or his hands, but between his ears. When you watch the game film with this in mind, you start to see it everywhere. He processed the game at a higher speed than anyone else on the ice. You've probably heard the cliche that great players seem to have more time and space than everyone else. It looks like the game is moving in slow motion for them. This isn't a trick of the light, it's a trick of the mind. That perceived extra second comes from an ability to anticipate the flow of the game, to see the patterns developing, and to recognize the geometry of the ice so intuitively that you know where the puck is going to be long before it gets there. Kharlamov had this ability in spades. His physical skills were simply the tools his brilliant hockey mind used to execute its vision. Let's break down what we mean by hockey IQ into tangible components. First, there's anticipation. This is the skill of reading cues of defensemen's eyes, the angle of a winger's skates, the way a goalie is holding his stick to predict the next event. Second, there's spatial awareness. This is the ability to have a constant 360-degree mental map of where all 9 other players are on the ice, without having to physically look. And third, there's pattern recognition, the ability to see a breakout forming or a defensive coverage rotating and to instantly identify the structural weakness. Kharlamov was a grandmaster in all 3 categories. To see this in action, let's look at a play that isn't on any of his goal-scoring highlight reels. Let us go to the film room and find a clip of him playing defense in the neutral zone. You'll see the opposing team starting a breakout from behind their own net. The defenseman has the puck, and he's looking up the boards to his winger, who is waiting at the red line. It's the most standard, common breakout pass in hockey. For most forwards on the back check, their focus would be on the puck carrier. But watch Kharlamov. Let's pause the tape right here. You can see his head is up. He is not watching the puck. He is reading the defenseman's eyes. He sees the intended target, and before the defenseman has even started his passing motion, you'll see Kharlamov begin to change his skating path. He's not moving towards the puck. He's drifting into the passing lane. He angles his body and his stick perfectly, and he intercepts the pass in full stride, never breaking his momentum. In a single, fluid sequence, he has used his brain to turn a routine defensive responsibility into a sudden, dangerous counterattack heading the other way. That's a play that never shows up on the score sheet, but it's pure genius. This brings us to a common counter-argument, or rather, a common bias in how we evaluate hockey players. As fans and media, we are naturally drawn to the spectacular, highlight reel plays, the coast-to-coast rush, the booming slap shot, the incredible. That's the stuff that makes you jump out of your seat. We tend to overvalue those explosive, visible skills, the invisible skills, the subtle art of positioning, the quiet genius of anticipation. The hundreds of tiny, correct decisions a player makes over the course of a game often go unnoticed, but those are the skills that truly drive winning. You'll hear players like Wayne Gretzky or Sidney Crosby constantly lauded for their supreme hockey intelligence. Gretzky famously said, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been." That single quote is the perfect definition of hockey IQ. And while Kharlamov is remembered for his breathtaking speed and skill, he belongs in that very same conversation as one of the most intelligent players of all time. The difference is that while Gretzky's genius was paired with skating that was good but not great, Kharlamov's mind was strapped to a rocket. He was a cerebral assassin in a speedster's body, a combination that made him almost impossible to contain. This is the key to understanding his longevity and his consistency. His physical gifts gave him a high ceiling, but it was his mind that gave him a high floor. Even on nights when his legs might not have been at their explosive best, he could still dominate a game with his positioning and his brain. You could try to neutralize his speed with a hook or a hold. You could try to punish his skill with a slash to the ankle or a hit from the blind side, but you could not outthink him. His mind was the one part of his game that was completely untouchable. We've talked about Valeri Kharlamov's mind, the supercomputer that processed the game faster than anyone else, the one part of him that opponents truly couldn't touch. But in the spring of 1976, just a few months after those legendary Super Series games in Montreal and Philadelphia, a random violent event off the ice would test his spirit and his body in a way no hockey game ever could. After a night of celebration, A car crash on a wet Moscow road threatened to silence the magician forever. It was a moment that would force him to draw on a completely different kind of strength, a reserve of inner toughness that would become as much a part of his legend as any of his on ice heroics. The accident was severe. Kharlamov, who was driving, suffered a concussion to broken ribs and numerous bruises, but the most devastating injury was to his right leg. He had a complex, displaced fracture above the tibia and the fibula to bones in the lower leg. For a normal person, it's a catastrophic injury requiring months of painful rehabilitation. For a world-class athlete whose entire game is built on explosive skating, balance, and agility, it was considered a career death sentence. The initial prognosis from the Soviet doctors was grim. They were focused on just making sure he could walk again without a limp. A return to professional hockey, let alone to the pinnacle of the sport, was deemed almost impossible. This is where you see the true measure of the man. The comeback he mounted was a monumental testament to his willpower and mental fortitude. It's one thing to recover physically, bones heal, muscles can be rebuilt, but the psychological mountain he had to climb was arguably even steeper. You have to imagine what that's like. You are an artist whose medium is movement, and suddenly, your most essential tool is shattered. The first challenge is battling the fear that you'll never be the same, that every stride will bring pain, that one wrong fall could mean the end. Then comes the frustration of the rehabilitation itself, the grueling, monotonous work of rebuilding strength, of your mind telling your body to do something it has done millions of times, only for it to fail. His recovery became a national story. His teammates from CSKA and the national team were constant visitors at his hospital bed. Coach Konstantin Lokhta developed a unique training program for him while he was still laid up, having him lift weights and do exercises for his upper body and his uninjured leg. But the most poignant moments came months later when he was finally cleared to get back on the ice. The man who had terrorized the best defensemen in the world didn't rejoin the Red Army team. Instead, you have this image of him quietly taking the ice with the CSKA youth team, surrounded by kids who idolized him. He had to essentially relearn how to skate, how to trust his edges again, how to find the perfect balance that was once as natural to him as breathing. Step by step, stride by stride, he painstakingly rebuilt his game from the ground up. His official return to the CSKA lineup came just a few months later, in the fall of 1976. Against their crosstown rivals, Krylia Savatov, the Soviet Wings, the arena was electric. You can imagine the roar of the crowd, giving a hero's welcome to a player they thought they might never see again. And in a moment that felt like it was scripted by a Hollywood writer, Valeri Kharlamov scored a goal in his very first game back. It was a thunderous, emotional exclamation point on one of the most remarkable comebacks in sports history. Now, this is where you often hear the common sports trope, the counter-argument that he was never quite the same after the accident. And physically, there may be a sliver of truth to that. Did he still have that same extra gear, that half-second burst of explosive speed that could turn a defender inside out? Perhaps not. A catastrophic injury takes its toll, and he may have lost the top 5% of his acceleration. But what he may have lost in pure physical dynamism, he more than made up for in wisdom and experience. The accident didn't diminish him as a player, it forced him to evolve. No longer able to rely solely on his speed to beat opponents, he was forced to lean even more heavily on his supreme hockey IQ. You can watch his game film from 77, 78, and 79, and you see a master at work. He became an even more cerebral player, a brilliant playmaker who controlled the pace of the game, using his vision and anticipation to create chances for his line mates. He proved that he was still an utterly dominant force. Just 2 years after an injury that was supposed to end his career, he led the Soviet Union to a gold medal at the 1978 World Championships, and again in 1979. He didn't just come back, he came back and climbed right back to the top of the mountain. This comeback is a central pillar of his legacy. It proved that beneath the balletic grace and artistic flair was a core of pure, unbreakable steel. So Valeri Kharlamov returns from this devastating injury, not just as a player, but as a changed player. He has climbed the mountain of rehabilitation and proven he can still perform at the highest level in the world. But the evolution that began out of necessity, learning to rely more on his mind than his explosive speed, soon blossomed into a new and profound phase of his career. The dazzling young soloist, who took the world by storm in 1972, was transforming into the veteran conductor of the orchestra. The late 1970s saw Kharlamov embrace his role as a living legend, a mentor, and a crucial bridge between the golden eras of Soviet hockey. As the decade wore on, the components of the legendary CSKA machine began to age. The iconic troika of Kharlamov, Petrov, and Mikhailov, which had dominated world hockey for so long, was nearing the end of its historic run, but the Soviet system was designed for continuity. It was a conveyor belt of talent, and the next wave was already arriving. You have to picture this transition. A new generation of breathtakingly skilled young forwards was emerging, names that would soon become legendary in their own right. The powerful winger Vladimir Krutov, the cerebral center Igor Larionov, and the supremely gifted Sergei Makarov. This trio would eventually form the KLM Line, a unit that would terrorize the hockey world in the 1980s, in much the same way Kharlamov's line had in the 1970s. And who was there to guide them, to teach them the intricacies of the international game, to show them how to be professionals and champions? It was Valeri Kharlamov. In the later part of his career, you'd see him skate on lines with these future superstars. He was literally their on-ice professor. You can just imagine the education a young Sergei Makarov received lining up next to his childhood hero, learning the nuances of puck protection, anticipation, and when to use your speed, not from a coach on a whiteboard, but from the master himself in the middle of a game. Kharlamov's value was shifting. He was no longer just the primary offensive weapon. He was now the on-ice brain of the team, the steadying hand, the one who elevated the performance of everyone around him. A perfect showcase of this veteran directorial role came in the 1979 Challenge Cup. This was a best-of-3 series held at Madison Square Garden in New York City, pitting the Soviet national team against a roster of the NHL's very best all-stars. The NHL team was stacked with talent at its absolute peak: Guy Lafleur, Brian Trottier, Mike Bossy, Dennis Potvin. After the NHL won the first game, the Soviets stormed back, winning the next two to take the series, culminating in a shocking, dominant 6-0 victory in the deciding third game. It was another seismic event that proved the continued strength of the Soviet program. Now, if you look at the box score from that final 6-0 game, you'll see the goals came from the younger players like Krutov and Makarov. But if you watch the tape of the entire series, you see the subtle but profound influence of Kharlamov. Watch him on the power play in Game 2. He gets the puck on the half wall. The young, pre-injury Kharlamov might have tried a high-risk, one-on-one move to get to the net. The veteran Kharlamov is different. He's patient. He protects the puck, holding it on his hip, letting the play develop. You'll see him draw the NHL All-Stars towards him, creating a vacuum of space elsewhere on the ice. Then, with perfect timing, he just slides a simple, intelligent 10-foot pass into that vacated space. A teammate gets the puck with acres of room and time to make a play. It's a sequence that doesn't result in a point for Kharlamov, and it won't ever make a highlight reel. But it is the genesis of a greater scoring chance. It is a winning play, born of pure experience and intelligence. This leads to a counter-argument you might hear from someone just looking at the statistics. If you're a box score watcher, you might look at Kharlamov's goal totals from the late 70s, which were naturally a bit lower than at his absolute peak, and conclude that he was declining or had lost a step. But this is a classic case of failing to see the whole picture. It's about redefining what value means for a veteran player. His worth was no longer measured simply in goals and assists. It was measured in his calming influence, his impact on puck possession, and his direct effect on the development of his teammates. He became like a legendary point guard in basketball, a Chris Paul or a Steve Nash, whose primary job is to control the tempo of the game and make everyone else on the floor better. This final chapter of his playing career might be one of his most impressive. It showed his complete lack of ego and his deep devotion to the collective, to the jersey on his chest. He wasn't desperately trying to cling to the spotlight. He was actively working to pass the torch, to ensure that the dynasty he helped build would continue long after he was gone. He was the hero who had inspired a new generation, and then he became the mentor who taught them how to win. It was the final, and perhaps most selfless, act of his on-ice genius. As Valeri Kharlamov was evolving as a player, embracing this new role as a veteran mentor, a seismic shift was occurring behind the Soviet bench. The philosophical ground beneath the entire Red Army hockey program was moving. The era of the fiery, passionate, and often eccentric Anatoly Tarasov, the man who saw hockey as a form of ballet, was a fading memory. In his place rose a new, imposing figure, a coach with a radically different vision for the game. He was a stern, meticulous, and demanding tactician named Viktor Tikhonov, and his arrival in the late 1970s as head coach of both CSKA and the national team would change everything. The transition from Tarasov to Tikhonov was not just a changing of the guard, it was a fundamental clash of ideologies. We've talked at length about Tarasov's philosophy of creative hockey. His system was built to encourage improvisation, interchangeability, and artistic freedom, all within a disciplined framework. He wanted his players to be thinkers, to be on-ice problem solvers. Tikhonov's approach was the polar opposite. He was an authoritarian, a master strategist who believed in absolute control and the perfection of a system. He didn't want improvisers, he wanted flawless executors. If Tarasov's team was a jazz ensemble, Tikhonov's was a classical orchestra with a ruthless conductor who demanded that every single note be played exactly as written on the page. Every single time, this new philosophy manifested in ways that completely reshaped the lives of the players. Tikhonov was famous for his iron-fisted control. To ensure total dedication and to eliminate distractions, he moved the players of the national team into military-style barracks for 10 to 11 months out of the year, isolating them from their families and the outside world. His training camps were legendary for their grueling intensity, but the focus was different from Tarasov's. While Tarasov used brutal methods to build a foundation for creativity, Tikhonov used them to drill his systems into his players through endless, mind-numbing repetition. He wanted his players' reactions to be automatic. He didn't want them to have to think during a game. He wanted them to simply execute the patterns they had practiced thousands of times. You can see the difference on the ice. If you watch a Soviet team from the Tarasov era of the early 70s, you see that fluid, unpredictable rotation we've discussed. You see a beautiful, organized chaos. Now, if you watch the Soviet team from the late 70s or early 80s under Tikhonov, you see something different. The skill is still immense, absolutely breathtaking, but the structure is far more rigid. The breakouts are more patterned. The defensive system, a suffocating five-man unit, is almost robotic in its precision. The free-flowing artistry was being replaced by a relentless, methodical efficiency. It was still beautiful, but it was the beauty of a perfectly engineered machine, not the beauty of a spontaneous work of art. For a veteran player like Valeri Kharlamov, a player whose entire career had been a monument to creativity and improvisation, this was a profound and difficult adjustment. He was the last great star of the Tarasov school. He was an artist being asked to paint by numbers. You can see in his play during this period that he is trying to adapt. He's still brilliant, but his role is now to be an experienced, reliable component within Tikhonov's larger machine. The veteran mentorship role we just talked about was, in many ways, an extension of this. Tikhonov relied on Kharlamov's leadership and experience to help teach the younger generation like Krutov and Makarov the discipline required to execute this demanding new system. Now, you cannot argue with the results. This brings us to the crucial counter-argument. Viktor Tikhonov's methods, however harsh or creatively stifling, built arguably the single most dominant dynasty in the history of international sports. The Red Army team of the 1980s, led by the KLM Line that Kharlamov helped mentor, was an unstoppable force. They won 8 world championships to Olympic gold medals, and the 1981 Canada Cup in spectacular fashion. Tikhonov was a winner, plain and simple. But the question has always lingered: at what cost? In the pursuit of systematic perfection, did Tikhonov's approach squeeze out some of the very soul, the unpredictable human genius that had made Soviet hockey so revolutionary in the first place? While the team became a more efficient winning machine, some of the joy and spontaneity seemed to fade. Valeri Kharlamov's final years are the perfect embodiment of this tension. He was the ghost of hockey past, a living reminder of a more romantic, more artistic era, trying to find his place in a new, more scientific age. He had overcome brutal opponents and a catastrophic injury, but now, in the twilight of his career, he faced his final, most complex challenge, adapting his free-spirited game to the unyielding will of an authoritarian coach who was building a hockey empire in his own image. We place Valeri Kharlamov in the context of his own team, his coaches, and the unique Soviet system he called home. But to truly gauge the greatness of a player, to understand their place in the global pantheon, you have to measure them against the other giants of their era. And in the 1970s, if you were looking for the most exciting dynamic, and dominant offensive force in the National Hockey League, all eyes were on a player who in many ways felt like Kharlamov's North American mirror image, the Montreal Canadiens. Electrifying superstar guy the Flower Lafleur. The debate over who was the better player, Kharlamov or Lafleur, is one of those classic barbershop arguments that defined an entire decade of hockey. Both were generational talents. Both were defined by their breathtaking speed and otherworldly offensive creativity, and both were the undisputed heartbeats of their respective dynasties. But when you put the films side by side, you see that they were the very different kinds of geniuses, applying their similar gifts in ways that perfectly reflected the philosophies of their opposing hockey worlds. Lafleur was a comet, a brilliant, individualistic force of nature. Kharlamov was a phantom, an elusive, collective-oriented artist. Let's start with the visual, because it tells you so much of the story. You can picture Guy Lafleur perfectly, even if you never saw him play live. He's flying down the right wing boards at the old Montreal Forum, and the first thing you notice is he isn't wearing a helmet. His long, blonde hair is flowing behind him, a golden trail marking his explosive path. He skates with a thrilling, almost reckless abandon. He's a blur of raw power and grace, and you, the fans, and every defender on the ice know exactly what's coming. As soon as he gains the blue line, he is going to wind up and unleash one of the most feared and blistering slap shots in the history of the game. It was a spectacular, high-volume, rock and roll style of hockey. Lafleur was the lead singer and the lead guitarist, and he wanted the puck on his stick so he could make the magic happen. Now, contrast that with the image of Kharlamov we've been building. He is lower to the ice, more compact, his movements more controlled and subtle. He's not a comet streaking in a predictable, albeit unstoppable, line. He's more like a hummingbird, capable of sudden stops and starts, of moving forward, backward, and laterally with equal ease. Lafleur often beat you with pure, overwhelming, north-south speed. Kharlamov beat you with agility, with deception, with an unpredictable change of direction that left you spinning. You could see this difference when they shared the ice in that legendary 3-3 tie on New Year's Eve, 1975. It was like watching the master painters using completely different techniques. Lafleur was trying to land the one perfect, powerful brushstroke to finish the canvas, while Kharlamov was using hundreds of small, precise, and intricate touches to create his masterpiece. This brings us to the great counter-argument, the statistical case that is often made, especially in North America, for Lafleur's superiority, and it's a powerful case. They'll point to the numbers, and the numbers are staggering. Guy Lafleur was the first player in NHL history to record 6 consecutive seasons of at least 50 goals and 100 points. He won 3 Art Ross trophies as the league's leading scorer, the Hart trophies as the league's MVP, and a Conn Smythe as the playoff MVP on paper. It seems like an open and shut case, but this is where you have to understand that comparing their statistics is a classic apples and oranges exercise. Their numbers are a direct reflection of the completely different systems and philosophies they played in. Lafleur was the offensive focal point of the Canadiens, and he was encouraged to shoot, and shoot some more. He was a volume shooter who would regularly rack up 350 to 400 shots in a season. Kharlamov played in a Soviet system that actively de-emphasized individual statistics. Puck possession was valued above all else in that system. Passing up a good shot for yourself in order to set up a teammate for a great shot was considered the correct and often mandatory hockey play. Kharlamov's goal and assist totals, as impressive as they were, tell only a fraction of the story of his on-ice impact. So the question isn't really who was better. The more interesting question is, what kind of genius do you prefer? Do you prefer the spectacular, individual brilliance of the Comet, the player who could take over a game with his explosive power and will? Or do you prefer the subtle, systematic brilliance of the Phantom, the player whose genius was in making 5 players on the ice move as one? Guy Lafleur was the perfect superstar for the NHL, an individual artist who painted on the canvas of a 60-minute game. Valeri Kharlamov was the perfect superstar for the Soviet system, a master craftsman who was one brilliant part of an intricate, beautiful machine. Both were legends, both terrified defensemen, and the debate over their places in history is a testament to their contrasting, yet equally transcendent, greatness. So whether he was facing the raw power and explosive shot of a Guy Lafleur in Montreal, the brutal systematic intimidation of the Flyers in Philadelphia, or the disciplined national teams of Sweden and Czechoslovakia, Valeri Kharlamov was constantly presented with a vast array of defensive challenges. He was a puzzle that the best minds in hockey were trying to solve for over a decade. And in the 1970s, one of the most popular and effective methods that coaches used to try and stifle high-flying offenses like the one he spearheaded was a system that was the direct ancestor of the modern neutral zone trap, the left wing lock. To appreciate how Kharlamov's genius operated on a tactical level, you have to understand the problem he was consistently asked to solve. So let's get into the X's and O's for a moment. Picture a standard breakout. Your defenseman has the puck behind his own net, and he wants to make a simple, effective pass up the boards to his winger to start the rush. The left wing lock was a defensive system designed specifically to take this primary option away. Instead of having his left winger forecheck deep into your zone, the opposing coach would have him hang back, stationing himself in the neutral zone near the boards. You'd have the center clogging up the middle lane and the two defensemen standing tall at their blue line. What this creates, essentially, is a 3 or 4-man wall across the neutral zone, specifically designed to choke off the transition game and force a turnover. It was a frustrating, effective, and, for many, a boring style of hockey that was designed to slow the game to a crawl. Now, the standard response to this kind of trap is to just dump the puck in deep behind the defense and chase after it, conceding possession in the hope of winning a puck battle. But for the Soviet team, a team whose entire philosophy was built on puck possession, giving the puck away was considered a cardinal sin. And this is where you can see Kharlamov's unique skill set and hockey IQ come together to systematically dismantle this type of rigid defensive shell. He refused to play the defense's game, instead of skating full speed into the wall, which is what the trap is designed to handle. Kharlamov would do something completely counterintuitive. You can see it on the film. As he approached the red line and saw the trap forming, he would often slow down, sometimes coming to an almost complete stop. This simple act of braking completely short-circuited the defensive system. A trap is built on timing, on anticipating the forward momentum of the attacking players. By stopping, Kharlamov created chaos in their structure. Defenders, expecting him to keep coming, would be thrown off their angles. From that momentary standstill, he had a menu of options. He might use his incredible vision to execute a perfect drop pass to a defenseman trailing the play, who now had a head of steam against stationary defenders. Or, more famously, he would use his telepathic chemistry with his center, Valeri Petrov. He'd make a short, 10-foot pass to Petrov in the middle of the ice and then immediately explode into the scene that his pass had just created. Petrov would give it right back, the classic give and go. And suddenly Kharlamov was behind the first layer of the trap and attacking the defenseman with speed. This brings up one of the great ongoing debates in all of sports. Can a great system neutralize a great player? There is a strong argument to be made that a well-coached, disciplined team executing a perfect defensive system can, in fact, shut down an individual superstar by taking away their time and space. We saw the Flyers do it to a certain extent through physical intimidation. A tactical system like the left wing lock was designed to do the same thing with positioning. And to be fair, these systems often worked. Many talented offensive players in that era saw their production plummet against disciplined, trapping teams. But Kharlamov was the ultimate counter-argument. He was proof that a truly transcendent genius, a player whose defining characteristic is improvisation, cannot be fully contained by a system. A defensive system, by its very nature, is a set of rules and predictions. It's designed to stop predictable patterns of attack. But Valeri Kharlamov was fundamentally unpredictable. He could solve the defensive equation on the fly because he was thinking and seeing the game at a level above the system itself. His ability to change the pace, to use his line mates, to attack from unexpected angles, it meant that for every problem the system presented, he could create a new, unforeseen solution. In this way, he was the perfect product of the Tarasov philosophy. Tarasov's entire concept of kombinatsiya was designed to be the antidote to rigid, positional hockey. So Kharlamov wasn't just one player breaking a trap. He was the manifestation of an entire philosophy built for that exact purpose. He saw the neutral zone trap not as an impenetrable wall, but as a fascinating puzzle, and night after night, he took a quiet, intellectual pleasure in showing the world exactly how to solve it. We've broken down the X's and O's, the systems, the counters, the individual skills, and the team philosophies. But a player's legacy, their true, lasting impact, isn't just found on the videotape or in the record books. It's woven into the very culture of the game. It's in the stories passed down from one generation to the next. It's in the symbols they leave behind. And for Valeri Kharlamov, The most powerful and enduring symbol of his genius is sewn right onto the back of his jersey, the number 17. In the world of sports, some numbers become more than just identifiers. They become imbued with the spirit of the player who made them famous. When you see the number 23 in basketball, you think of Michael Jordan and a certain kind of aerial grace and competitive fire. When you see number 99 in hockey, you think of Wayne Gretzky and unparalleled intelligence. In the Soviet Union and later in Russia, the number 17 ascended to this same mythic status. It transcended the man and came to represent a specific, cherished brand of hockey excellence. It stood for dazzling, imaginative skill, for the courage to take on and defeat bigger, stronger opponents, and for the resilience to overcome devastating adversity. It became the unofficial crest of the hockey artist. The most tangible proof of this number's powerful legacy can be seen on the backs of the players who came after him. For generations of young Russian hockey players growing up in the 1980s and 90s, the stories of Kharlamov were the stuff of legend. He was their national hero. Their Bobby Orr and Guy Lafleur rolled into one. To choose to wear his number was a profound statement, and there is no better example of this than one of the most dynamic Russian superstars of the modern era, Ilya Kovalchuk. For much of his career, especially when representing his country, Kovalchuk proudly wore number 17, and it was no coincidence. You can see Kharlamov's spirit in Kovalchuk's game, the explosive skating, the incredible hands, the flair for the dramatic, and that lethal, creative finishing ability. When a young Kovalchuk pulled on that jersey, he wasn't just picking a random number. He was consciously choosing to carry a torch. He was paying homage to the hero of his youth and aspiring to that same brand of artistic, courageous, and quintessentially Russian style of play. Even more poignantly, Kharlamov's own son, Alexander, who became a professional hockey player himself, wore his father's number 17 throughout his career, a son literally carrying his father's legacy on his back. Now, to understand why this number took on such a deep, singular meaning, you have to look at the cultural context, which brings us to a sort of counter-argument from a North American perspective. In the NHL, certain numbers are, of course, iconic. The number 9 is synonymous with greatness, but it belongs to Gordie Howe and Maurice Richard and Bobby Hull. The number 4 belongs to the incomparable Bobby Orr, but also to Jean Beliveau. The reverence is there, but it's often shared. In the monolithic, state-sponsored sports culture of the Soviet Union, however, the dynamic was different. The national hockey team was not just a collection of athletes, it was a symbol of the nation's strength and a vital propaganda tool during the Cold War. These players were national heroes in a way that is difficult for Western audiences to fully comprehend. Valeri Kharlamov, as the most beloved and brilliant star of the team that first humbled the West, became the face of that national pride. He was their David against the NHL's Goliath. His success was the nation's success. Therefore, his number, 17, became fused with that national identity. It wasn't just about honoring a great hockey player. It was about honoring a national style of play and a source of immense patriotic pride. It represented the idea that Soviet creativity and collective will could triumph over North American brute force and individualism. The number 17 became a piece of cultural iconography, a shorthand for a glorious chapter in the nation's history. So when you see that number on the ice today, especially on the jersey of a Russian player, it's important to understand the weight it carries. It is more than just the digits. It is a declaration of intent. It's a nod to a philosophy of hockey that values artistry over attrition, creativity over conformity. It represents the underdog spirit of the smaller player who could dominate giants, and the unbreakable will of a hero who was struck down but refused to stay down. When a young player chooses to wear number 17, they are telling the world they don't just want to play the game, they want to play the game with magic. The number 17 became a powerful symbol of national pride, and for the Soviet Union during the Cold War, there was no stage where that pride was more intensely and globally on display than the Olympic Games. While the Stanley Cup was the pinnacle for the NHL, and the World Championships were the key annual event for European hockey, the Olympics were something else entirely. Winning Olympic gold in hockey was paramount, a state-mandated objective, the ultimate for your validation of the superiority of their system. For a decade, Valeri Kharlamov was a central figure on that golden stage, and his journey through 3 different Olympic Games tells the full story of his team as arc, from untouchable gods to mortal men. His first 2 Olympic appearances were a portrait of absolute dominance. At the 1970 Games in Sapporo, Japan, A 23-year-old Kharlamov was an offensive force, a whirlwind of speed and skill. He tied for the tournament lead in scoring with 9 goals and 7 assists in just 5 games, leading the Soviet Union to a gold medal in a performance that was a mere prelude to the shock he would deliver to Canada later that year. For years later, at the 1976 Games in Innsbruck, Austria, it was the same story. Now at the peak of his powers, Kharlamov, fresh off his incredible comeback from the car accident, was a dominant veteran presence. The Soviets once again steamrolled the competition, capturing their 4th consecutive gold medal. In these first 2 Olympics, the Red Army machine seemed less like a hockey team and more like a law of nature. They were inevitable. This is the crucial context you need to understand the earth-shattering shock of his 3rd and final Olympics, the 1980 Winter Games in Lake Placid, New York. The political backdrop was incredibly tense. The Soviet Union had recently invaded Afghanistan, and the Cold War was at one of its frostiest points. On the ice, the Soviet team was, once again, considered an absolute lock for the gold medal. They were a juggernaut, a team of seasoned professionals stacked with legends like Kharlamov, Petrov, Mikhailov, and Tretiak, now bolstered by the brilliant young generation of Fedorov, Makarov, and Krutov. Their opponent in the medal round, the United States, was a collection of college kids and amateurs. It was supposed to be a formality. It became a catastrophe. We all know the story of the miracle on ice from the American perspective, but let's try to view that game through the eyes of Valeri Kharlamov. He's 32 years old, the respected veteran leader on a team of superstars. He and his fellow veterans know what it takes to win on this stage, but from the beginning, things feel off. The young American team is playing with a frantic, fearless energy, buoyed by a ferociously partisan crowd. The Soviets, for their part, seem uncharacteristically sloppy. Then comes the pivotal moment. At the very end of the first period, a 60-foot shot from an American player produces a massive rebound from Vladislav Tretiak, the undisputed best goaltender on the planet, and it leads to a shocking goal at the buzzer. In the intermission, coach Viktor Tikhonov makes a fateful and still inexplicable decision. He pulls Tretiak from the game. You have to understand the psychological impact of this move. It would be like pulling Michael Jordan in the 4th quarter of the NBA Finals. It sent a message of panic through the entire Soviet bench, and if you watch the footage from the 2nd and 3rd periods, you can see the disciplined Soviet system beginning to fray. Watch the reactions on the bench. You can see Kharlamov, Petrov, and the other veterans, their faces etched with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. They are trying to calm the younger players, trying to get them to stick to the system, but for the first time in a decade, the system isn't working. Players are trying to do too much on their own. The crisp, patient passing is replaced by rush shots and individual efforts. The American kids just keep coming, and with every passing minute, their belief grows while the Soviets' confidence shatters. This brings us to a vile counter-argument that humanizes the other side of this famous story. The Western narrative of the miracle often paints the Soviets as this arrogant, faceless, robotic empire that was dramatically slain by a plucky band of heroes. And while it was an incredible underdog story, that narrative strips the Soviet players of their humanity. For Kharlamov, this wasn't a grand geopolitical defeat. It was the most stunning and humiliating athletic failure of his entire life. This was a hockey game they were supposed to win 101, and they were losing it. It was a loss born of their own complacency, a catastrophic coaching error, the heroic goaltending of Jim Craig, and an inspired, once-in-a-lifetime performance from their opponents. The loss was a deep, personal, and professional wound for a proud champion who had known almost nothing but total victory on the world's biggest stages. While the crushing disappointment in Lake Placid was the final chapter of his Olympic story, it shouldn't overshadow the decade of brilliance that preceded it. His Olympic legacy is one of the gold medals, 36 points in 22 career games, and a long period of unquestioned supremacy. But that final game, that one impossible loss, serves as a stark reminder that even the greatest magicians and the most powerful dynasties are never truly invincible. The stunning loss at Lake Placid sent a shockwave through the entire Soviet hockey program. It was a national humiliation, a failure that demanded a swift and decisive response, a reassertion of global dominance for the proud veterans of that 1980 team. The next major international tournament, the 1981 Canada Cup, became everything. It was the ultimate chance for redemption, an opportunity to prove that the miracle on ice was a fluke and that the Red Army machine was still the most powerful force in the hockey world. For Valeri Kharlamov, now 33 years old, this tournament was meant to be his last dance on a world stage, a final bow for a legendary career. But in a cold, abrupt move that remains one of the most controversial decisions in Russian hockey history, his coach, Viktor Tikhonov, decided that he wouldn't be allowed to dance at all. Tikhonov's decision to leave a healthy and still effective Valeri Kharlamov off that 1981 Canada Cup roster was far more than a simple lineup choice. It was a calculated, symbolic act. It was the final, ruthless confirmation that the old guard was being swept away and that the team now belonged, completely and utterly, to Tikhonov and his new generation of stars. This was a power play, a stark demonstration of the coach's absolute authority. He was sending a message to the entire program that no player, not even a living legend and national hero, was bigger than his system. The era of sentimentality was over. To understand the cruelty of this decision, you have to look at how it unfolded. Kharlamov had a very strong 1980-81 season with CSKA, putting up 40 points in 41 games and playing his veteran leadership role to perfection. He went through the entire grueling training camp for the Canada Cup and by all accounts, was playing well. He fully expected to be on the plane to Canada. The team gathered for one final meeting. Before heading to the airport, it was there that Viktor Tikhonov stood before the players and read the final roster aloud. Name after name was called. The young stars Krutov, Larionov, Makarov, the brilliant defenseman Fedorov, Kasatonov. But as Tikhonov reached the end of the list, one name was conspicuously absent: Valeri Kharlamov. You can just imagine the stunned silence in that room. Tikhonov reportedly pulled Kharlamov aside and told him bluntly that he felt he was no longer in good enough physical condition to compete at that level. It was a decision that reportedly shocked and angered many of the other players. The veterans, who had gone to war with Kharlamov for a decade, were aghast. The younger players, the very ones Kharlamov had mentored and guided, couldn't believe that their teacher was being cast aside. This wasn't a respectful, mutually agreed upon retirement. This was a sudden, public, and humiliating dismissal. So, what was Tikhonov's rationale? This is where we have to look at the cold, pragmatic counter-argument from the coach's perspective. From Tikhonov's point of view, his job was not to manage farewell tours. His job was to win. He was building a team for the future, a team that would dominate the 1980s. The offensive engine of that team was now the KLM Line. They were younger, faster, and perhaps most importantly to Tikhonov, they were players he had molded himself. They were perfect cogs for his perfect machine. He may have genuinely believed that Kharlamov, for all his experience and intelligence, had lost a step and not another. Younger player would give the team a better chance to win. In the ruthless calculus of a coach, obsessed with victory, sentimentality is a liability. But even if you accept that pragmatic argument, the manner of the dismissal was what made it so controversial. To let a player of Kharlamov's stature go through the entire training camp, to let him believe he was part of the team right up until the final hour, was seen by many as needlessly cruel. A player who had given his entire adult life to the Red Army program, who had played through broken bones and overcome a catastrophic injury, who was a hero to millions. Surely that player had earned the right to a more dignified exit. He had earned the right to say goodbye to the international game on his own terms, to take one final skate in front of the Canadian fans who respected him so much. The decision was devastating for Kharlamov. To be told you're not good enough is one thing. To be cast aside by the very system you helped build, the system to which you dedicated your body and soul, was a deep and personal wound. He wasn't retiring. He was being fired. It was the final, bitter professional slight in a career that had been defined by grace. He was the hero who was being denied the chance to write his own final chapter. A cold decision by an unforgiving coach that would become infinitely more tragic and poignant in just a few short days. So Valeri Kharlamov, the national hero, is left behind in Moscow. His heart is heavy with the professional disappointment of a legendary career, ending not with a triumphant final skate, but with a quiet, unceremonious dismissal, while his teammates, his brothers in arms, are in Canada, preparing for a tournament that was supposed to be his swan song. He and his wife Irina are at their dacha, their country house, trying to process this new reality. What was supposed to be a week of him competing for his country became a quiet, unwanted period of reflection, and it was on a rainy morning during that week that this story of a hockey legend takes its final, unthinkable, and utterly tragic turn. On August 27, 1981, just a few days after being cut from the team, Kharlamov was in the passenger seat of his Volga sedan. His wife, Irina, who was a less experienced driver, was behind the wheel. They were driving back to Moscow on a wet, slick highway. According to reports, Irina lost control of the car on the slippery pavement. The Volga skidded across the center line and directly into the path of an oncoming truck. The collision was catastrophic. Valeri, Irina, and her cousin, who was in the back seat, were all killed instantly in a split second of random, cruel fate. The magician was gone. He was just 33 years old. His two young children, Alexander and Bigonita, were suddenly orphans. The news of his death elevated Valeri Kharlamov from a beloved sports legend into a near mythical figure, a national martyr. The sheer, heartbreaking tragedy of the circumstances is what cemented this. The timing was so poetic it felt scripted. The hero, cast aside by the unfeeling system he served, dies tragically at home while his comrades are fighting on foreign soil. His story was no longer just about hockey. It was now a Russian epic of glory, sacrifice, and unbearable loss. The news from Moscow reached the Soviet team thousands of miles away in Winnipeg, Canada, where they were preparing for a game. You have to try and imagine that scene. These were men who had been raised in a stoic, unemotional system, taught to suppress their feelings in the name of the collective. But this news broke them. Vladislav Tretiak, his longtime friend and teammate, spoke of how the players were completely shattered, many of them openly weeping. And in a moment of profound and terrible irony, it was Viktor Tikhonov, the very man who had cut Kharlamov from the team just days earlier, who had to stand before his grieving players and deliver the devastating news. The team was faced with an impossible choice: fly home for the funeral of their friend and leader, or stay and play in his memory. They chose to play, and what followed was one of the most inspired and emotionally charged performances in hockey history. You could see the change in their play for the rest of that 1981 Canada Cup. They were playing with a controlled fury, a relentless, desperate energy. They weren't just playing for the Soviet Union anymore. They were playing for Valeri. They dedicated the tournament to his memory, and they were not going to be denied. They culminated this emotional crusade in the tournament final, where they faced a star-studded Team Canada roster, featuring Wayne Gretzky in his prime. The Soviets didn't just win, they annihilated them. The final score was 8-1. It was a shocking, methodical, and brilliant demolition. A furious and perfect tribute to the creative, dominant style of hockey that their fallen friend had perfected. Now, in the face of such a poetic tragedy, it's human nature to try and connect the dots. To create a narrative, you'll sometimes hear a version of the story that implies Kharlamov died of a broken heart, that the disappointment of being cut somehow led to the accident. But we have to resist this temptation to romanticize a senseless tragedy. The professional slight he suffered was real and deeply painful, but it did not cause his death. The truth is both more simple and more heartbreaking. It was an accident, a skid on a wet road, a moment of lost control, the kind of random event that can happen to anyone. The tragedy is precisely in its meaninglessness, that a life so full of grace, purpose, and beauty was extinguished by something so mundane. Back in Moscow, his funeral was an event of national mourning. Thousands upon thousands of ordinary citizens lined the streets, openly crying, wanting to pay their last respects to a man who felt like a member of their own family. His teammates, who were still in the USSR, served as his pallbearers. The hockey world, from his fiercest Canadian rivals to his adoring fans at home, was united in grief. The game had lost one of its brightest lights, a true artist whose impact was felt far beyond the box score. The man was gone, but the myth of number 17 was now immortal. Valeri Kharlamov, the man, was gone, but Kharlamov, the idea, the on-ice philosophy he represented, was more powerful than ever. His tragic death didn't end his influence, it amplified it. His memory sanctified his style of play, turning it into a sacred text for the next generation of Soviet superstars. You can draw a direct, unbroken line from the improvisational artistry of Valeri Kharlamov in the 1970s to the ruthlessly dominant Soviet teams of the 1980s, and even further, across the ocean and through the Iron Curtain, to one of the most revolutionary and beautiful units in the history of the National Hockey League, the Detroit Red Wings Russian Five. His stylistic DNA became the foundational blueprint for the players who immediately followed him. We've talked about how he personally mentored a young Vladimir Krutov and Sergei Makarov. Those two, along with the brilliant center Igor Larionov, formed the legendary KLM Line, paired with the two revolutionary defensemen Vyacheslav Fedorov and Alexei Kasatonov. This five-man unit, often called the Green Unit for the green jerseys they wore in practice, was the next evolution. They took the principles of puck possession, constant motion, and creative interplay that Kharlamov had perfected, and they honed them into an even more dominant and systematic weapon under Viktor T. Konov. They were the machine that Kharlamov had helped design, and they terrorized the hockey world throughout the 80s. But the most fascinating chapter of Kharlamov's posthumous influence came with the fall of the Berlin Wall. As the Soviet Union began to crumble, its greatest hockey players began to trickle and then flood into the NHL, and they brought their hockey gospel with them. Two of the most important disciples were the intellectual center, Igor Larionov, nicknamed the Professor, and the trailblazing defenseman, Slava Fedosov. After years of struggling against the Soviet authorities for the right to play in North America, they finally arrived in the NHL, and in the mid-1990s, a visionary coach in Detroit, Scotty Bowman, decided to do something no one had ever dared to do before. He put his five best Russian players on the ice at the same time. The result was the Russian Five: Sergei Fedorov, Igor Larionov, Vyacheslav Kozlov, Vyacheslav Fedosov, and Vladimir Konstantinov. And what they brought to the NHL was a style of hockey that the league hadn't seen before. Let's pull up a clip of the Russian Five in their prime, say from the 1997 Stanley Cup playoffs. Just watch a single shift. It is pure, unadulterated combinatia. It is the ghost of Kharlamov's Red Army team, resurrected in a winged wheel jersey. You see five players moving as a single, fluid organism. There are no fixed positions. Fedosov, a defenseman, is carrying the puck deep into the offensive zone. Fedorov, the center, has rotated back to cover the point. They are making short, crisp, 10-foot passes. They refuse to dump the puck in. They might control the puck in the offensive zone for a minute and a half, forcing the defending team to chase until they are completely exhausted and hopelessly out of position. It was a style that was the polar opposite of the clutch and grab, defense-first trapping style that was strangling the NHL at the time. Now, there's a counter-argument that gives the credit for this innovation to the legendary coach, Scotty Bowman, and Bowman absolutely deserves immense praise. He is one of the greatest hockey minds of all time, and any other coach, a less secure or less imaginative coach, would have taken these brilliant Russian players and tried to force them into a conventional North American chip and chase system. They would have told the defensemen to stay back and the forwards to stay in their lanes. But Bowman's genius in this case wasn't in inventing a new system. It was in having the wisdom and humility to recognize the genius of an old one. He didn't create the Russian Five style of play, he imported it. He unleashed it. He understood that these players had been raised in a completely different hockey ecosystem, and the best way to coach them was to simply open the rink door, give them the puck, and let them play the game the way they had been taught since they were children. Igor Larionov, the professor himself, was the direct link. He was the on-ice coach for that unit, the keeper of the flame, and he has spoken often about how their goal was to replicate that creative, puck possession style that was epitomized by his hero, Valeri Kharlamov. So when the Detroit Red Wings finally broke their long championship drought and won the Stanley Cup in 1997 with the Russian Five playing a central and spectacular role, it was more than just a victory for a city and a team. In a very real way, it was a posthumous victory for Valeri Kharlamov. It was the ultimate validation of the hockey philosophy that he had so beautifully embodied. His style of play, the artistic, intelligent, and collective approach to the game, had not only conquered the world stage, but it had finally crossed the ocean, infiltrated the NHL, and risen to the top of the mountain. The magician's echo was very, very long. The echoes of his game were felt on the ice for decades. An unbroken stylistic line that culminated in a Stanley Cup victory for the Russian Five in Detroit. But as the years turn into decades, an on-ice legacy isn't enough. A story needs keepers. A memory needs institutions to preserve it for those who never had the chance to witness the magic for themselves. For Valeri Kharlamov, that formal, official recognition would eventually come, both at home in his beloved Russia and, finally, in the heart of the North American hockey establishment that he had once so completely terrified. The landmark moment came in November of 2005. 4 years after his death, Valeri Kharlamov was posthumously inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. You have to understand how significant this was. For most of its history, the Hall of Fame, despite its name, was largely the NHL Hall of Fame. There was a deep-seated, institutional bias that suggested a player's greatness could only be truly validated through a career in the National Hockey League. The induction of his teammate Vladislav Tretiak in 1989 had cracked that door open, but the induction of Kharlamov, a skater, a forward whose entire legend was built on dismantling NHL defenses from the outside, blew the door off its hinges. It was the Hall's definitive acknowledgement that the hockey world was bigger than one league, and that true greatness knows no borders. Let's picture the scene at that induction ceremony. It's a deeply poignant and emotional moment. Giving the induction speech is his old friend and goaltender, the great Tretiak, who speaks with heartfelt reverence for his fallen comrade, and then, stepping up to the podium to accept the honor, on his father's behalf is his son, Alexander Kharlamov. There, in the Cathedral of Canadian Hockey, the son of the Soviet magician accepts the plaque that officially places his father among the undisputed immortals of the game. It was a moment of reconciliation, a symbolic closing of a circle, as the hockey world that had once viewed him as a rival now embraced him as one of their own cherished legends. Now, this is where you hear the counter-argument. What took them so long? He passed away in 1981, and the induction didn't happen until 2005. Many of his NHL contemporaries were inducted years, even decades earlier. Was this a slight? And while the frustration of the long wait is understandable, you have to view it in the context of the Hall's own evolution. The institution itself had to change. It had to broaden its perspective and shed its parochial, NHL-centric worldview. Kharlamov's case, and the tireless advocacy for it by people like Tretiak and other international hockey figures, was a huge part of that change. So his induction wasn't just late, it was a transformative moment for the institution itself, a sign that it was finally ready to embrace its role as a truly global Hall of Fame. While the Hall of Fame induction was his official coronation in the West, his legacy is preserved even more actively and passionately back in Russia. There, he is not just a Hall of Famer, he is a permanent fixture of the cultural landscape. If you follow Russian hockey today, you'll know that the championship trophy of their premier junior league, the MHL, is called the Kharlamov Cup. Every year, the next generation of Russian stars, the next Ovechkins, the next Malkins, battles to have their name engraved on a trophy bearing the name of the man who set the standard for creative excellence. It's a direct, living link, using his memory to inspire the future. And then there's the 2013 Russian film, Legend of No. 17 Legend No. 17. This wasn't some small, independent documentary. This was a massive, critically acclaimed blockbuster, a national cinematic event. The film retold his story, focusing on the 1970 to Summit series, and it introduced his legend to millions of young Russians who were born long after his death. It reignited a national conversation about his career and cemented his status as a timeless Russian hero, a figure whose story of courage, skill, and tragedy transcended the world of sports. So you have these two pillars of modern remembrance. In North America, he is now officially recognized for what he was, an all-time great player. His plaque hanging in the Hall of Fame alongside those of his greatest rivals like Dryden, Clark, and Lafleur. And in Russia, he is something more, a national icon, a secular saint whose name adorns the trophies of the future and whose life story is told and retold as a source of immense cultural pride. His legacy is now truly global in its scope, yet it remains deeply, passionately national in its reverence. And so, after this long journey through the grainy footage of the 1970s, through the triumphs, the tragedies, the systems, and the symbols, we arrive back where we started with a simple comparison. That helps frame it all. Ovechkin and Kharlamov, the machine and the magician. Thinking about these two figures, who bookend the modern era of Russian hockey, gives you the clearest possible picture of Valeri Kharlamov's unique and irreplaceable place in the history of the game. Alex Ovechkin is, without question, a legend. He may very well finish his career as the greatest goal scorer who has ever lived. His greatness is quantifiable, tangible, and awe-inspiring. We can measure it in the sheer volume of pucks he has put in the net. He is the ultimate finishing product, a goal-scoring machine of unprecedented power and durability. His pursuit of Wayne Gretzky's all-time record is the perfect narrative for his career, a relentless, statistical march towards history. He is a brilliant product of the modern game, a perfect fusion of Russian skill and North American power forward dominance. Valeri Kharlamov represents a different and perhaps more elusive kind of greatness if Ovechkin is the machine. Kharlamov was the magician. His true impact was never something you could fully capture in a box score. How do you assign a number to the collective gasp of a sold-out Montreal Forum? What is the statistic for the number of defenders left frozen in his wake? His greatness wasn't measured in the quantity of his goals, but in the quality of his play and his complete control of the game's tempo and in the profound palpable fear he inspired in the best players in the world. Ovechkin's legend is written in the record books. Kharlamov's is written in the stories and the memories of those who saw him play. You can see this fundamental difference in their signature offensive plays. For Ovechkin, it's the one-timer from his office on the left. Side power play, you know it's coming. The opposing penalty killers know it's coming. The goalie knows it's coming, and he still scores. It is a play of overwhelming, repeatable, and almost scientific force. You can diagram it, you can practice it, but you still can't stop it. It's a testament to the perfection of a single, devastating weapon. Now, try to identify Kharlamov's signature play. You can't, and that's the entire point. Was it the sudden, inside-out cutback that left Donneray looking like he was stuck in concrete? Was it the impossible, spinning pirouette goal he scored on Ken Dryden? Was it the patient, cerebral, no-look drop pass he used to dismantle the left wing lock? His signature move was the one you never saw coming. His genius was rooted in pure, unadulterated improvisation. Ovechkin's one-timer is science. Kharlamov's game was jazz. In today's world of advanced analytics, a player like Kharlamov would be a fascinating and frustrating case study. The numbers would certainly show he was an elite player, but they would fail to capture the essence of what made him terrifying. How do you measure deception? How do you create a metric for the fear that led a player like Bobby Clarke to take a two-handed slash at his ankle? Kharlamov's legacy is a powerful reminder that while analytics are an invaluable tool for understanding the game, they cannot capture its soul. His greatness is proven not by a spreadsheet, but by the odd testimony of his peers, by the standing ovation from a rival crowd, and by the generations of players who would choose to wear his number. So let's not frame this as a debate over who was better. That's a disservice to both. They are two different pinnacles of Russian hockey. Alex Ovechkin is the greatest goal scorer the nation has ever produced, a legend of production. Valeri Kharlamov was its greatest artist, a legend of aesthetics. Both are hockey immortals. They are just remembered for different kinds of magic. One was the master of the unstoppable force. The other, the master of the unsolvable puzzle. And it was that puzzle, the one that Valeri Kharlamov presented to the hockey world every time he stepped on the ice, that forever changed the way the game was played and the way we appreciate its deepest beauty. That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the legend of Valeri Kharlamov. When you look back at his career, the takeaways are clear. We saw a player whose revolutionary skating ability and unparalleled hockey IQ made him virtually unstoppable. He was the on-ice embodiment of a creative, artistic hockey philosophy that challenged the North American way and changed the game forever. His story is one of breathtaking triumphs, from the shock of the '70 to Summit Series to the masterpiece in Montreal. But it is also a story of incredible resilience in the face of brutal opposition and a near-fatal injury. His influence stretched far beyond his own time, with his stylistic DNA visible in the great Russian players who followed, from the KLM Line to the iconic Russian Five. So next time you're watching a game, I encourage you to look beyond the goals and the hits. Look for the subtle genius, the player who controls the game's flow, who anticipates the play, who makes everyone around them better. Go back and watch the grainy footage of number 17 with this new perspective. See the artist at work. That's the final whistle for this episode. Until next time, keep watching the game.